Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Sustainability Commission on December 6, 2023. Some just background information. This meeting will be broadcast live on Glendale TV2, viewable on Spectrum Cable Channel 21, and ATT Uverse Glendale TV2, Channel 99. This meeting is also streamed live in high definition on youtube.com/myglendale. Excuse me. Meetings are also archived on the city website for viewing anytime at glendaleca.gov/agendas. You can call 818-548-4013 for program schedules. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. If you have any questions about matters on the agenda or requests for assistance, please contact the city clerk at 818-548-2090 during regular business hours. Thank you.
Now I'm going to conduct a roll call. Commissioner Bartusov, Commissioner Kartunyan, Commissioner Werner,
Here.
Vice Chair Bazemore,
Here.
Chair Pinkerton,
Here.
ex officio Welch. Here. Turn on your mic, please.
Here.
Ex officio Ispenjan.
Here.
Thank you. 1A, Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
1B, Land Acknowledgement.
Okay. We would like to acknowledge that we are holding this meeting in the city of Glendale on the traditional lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people. We would like to pay our respects to the elders, both past and present, and the Tongva communities who continue to be stewards of this land. We encourage our audience to learn more about the Tongva tribe and the many indigenous communities in California and beyond. And you can find a list of books and resources at eglendalec.org/Native American 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 1C, report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for December 6, 2023 meeting of the Sustainability Commission meeting was posted on November 30, 2023 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item number 2, approval of minutes. 2A, approval of the minutes of the Commission regular meeting held on October 5, 2023. May we please have a motion and second?
I believe Commissioner Werner has some corrections.
Yeah, a few, mostly minor, but okay. On page 2, paragraph 5, action items, the second paragraph where they mention the adopted related modifications to the citywide fee schedule. It says feed schedule. It should say fee. And then also it mentions that the commission recommended that the unknown trees under 30 inches to have a fine be assessed at $1,222. It should say trees of unknown size, not unknown trees. So, and then in the following paragraph, reports and information, subparagraph B, purchasing contracts, envelopes is misspelled, and the last word there says vehicle engine oil and retread should be tires, not tired. Maybe the person writing it was tired, but just say tires. But, that was it. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments, corrections? Okay.
Nope.
Guess we're ready for the vote.
Yeah, I move to approve the amendments with those corrections.
Second that.
Do we need a roll call for minutes? Commissioner Bartusov, Commissioner Kartunyan, Commissioner Werner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bazemore,
Yes.
Chair Pinkerton.
Yes.
Thank you. Item number 3, board member and staff comments. 3A, Environmental Stewardship Awards.
Vice Chair Bazemore is going to handle these since I'm on crutches, but we've got 4 to give out tonight. Thank you all for coming.
Okay. All right. I have, as mentioned by Chair Pinkerton, 4 different awards to give out tonight. Starting with our first one. This is, I should say, the Environmental Stewardship Award. So our first one is presented to Girl Scouts Troop 7371. And the the note here that it's being awarded for is for indigenous and creative design of foldouts, which effectively engaged youths in Glendale and helped spread the word about the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan throughout Valley View Elementary School. Going above and beyond, Girl Scout Troop 7371 crafted a compelling presentation about the CAP, reaching out to and presenting to 3rd and 4th graders. Additionally, they distributed 150 thoughtfully designed foldouts to teachers and students, accompanied by many packets of CAP materials containing informative pamphlets. The Scouts also collected valuable feedback cards showcasing their commitment to environmental advocacy and education. So on behalf of the entire Sustainability Commission, congratulations. All right, so I'm going to come down.
Doing photos?
The commissioners will join me at the front, so please, Scout Troop, come up to the podium and we'll do a photograph together. So. There. So, hold this, and one of you or all of you want to hold it. Whoever, just hold it together. Yeah. Perfect. All right, here, I'll let you guys hold. All right, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a name I know. So for our next Environmental Stewardship Award, this goes to our very own ex officio commissioner, Shant Ispengian. I hope I pronounced that right. For exhibiting remarkable leadership and initiative. Shant founded and spearheaded the Saving the Sea Club, transforming it into a statewide movement that effectively raises environmental awareness. Through Shant's guidance, high school chapters engage in impactful activities such as beach cleanups, recycling drives, and educational efforts. Shant's Earth Day initiative raised over $1,500, hosted educational assemblies, and provided reusable water bottles. Shant's dedication to advocacy has left an indelible mark, making him a deserving recipient. So on behalf of the Sustainability Commission, congratulations. Let's go to the front for a photo.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
We need to talk about
I was
this.
gonna say.
It was an LA restaurant.
Oh, I know.
Let the record reflect that Commissioner Bartos-Soof has joined the commission. Thanks.
Thank you. My bus was late.
All right, so for our third Environmental Stewardship Award, I am delighted to present this to the Adams Hill Neighborhood Association for outstanding commitment to sustainability by organizing the Adams Hill Art Festival in October, which actively raised awareness for the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan by collecting invaluable feedback from more than 100 adults and children. Their unwavering support and continuous efforts in conducting climate action and adaptation outreach have played a pivotal role in effectively spreading the message throughout the Adams Hill neighborhood. So on behalf of the Sustainability Commission, congratulations, Adams Hill Neighborhood Association.
And accepting the award on behalf of Adams Hill Neighborhood Association is Stephen Meek, their president of the association. I'm also vice president, but I thought it would be better to have someone else take the award. But the event was a lot of fun, and the city or the neighborhood association has a long track record of partnering with various city organizations such as Library Arts and Culture, the police department, the fire department, to further quality of life and issues and public safety in South Glendale in general and particularly Adams Hill. So we're glad that we're able to add sustainability to our long list of city partnerships.
Wonderful. All right, Mr. Meek, please join us at the front for a photo. Okay, and for our very last Environmental Stewardship Award for the evening, this award goes to our very own Commissioner Alec Bartrasov in acknowledgement for over a decade of remarkable contributions to sustainability in Glendale. Alec is recognized for establishing the first community garden in Glendale and leading Walk Bike Glendale. Alec's efforts have showcased unparalleled dedication and leadership, significantly contributing to the development of a greener and more sustainable community. So on behalf of the Sustainability Commission, congratulations, Commissioner Bartrasov. So we're going to take a photo now.
Eric did it.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to board member and staff comments. If you have any comments.
Does anyone have any comments they'd like to offer?
Yeah, me and Jeremy just have something to share. So we've been seeing the CAP has been going great, and then the office has been doing some workshops, and we felt that we could, contribute something as well. And, being student commissioners, we know like the impact the youth can have, and we thought it would be a great idea to expand those workshops and maybe do something with the youth. We were thinking something through the GUSD schools, if that was possible, elementary to high school, organizing some workshops that are a little more simple, a little more just to engage them in what climate change is and what are some sustainable alternatives that they could be practicing, and kind of get them introduced to CAP and the efforts the city is taking, and even to like acknowledge our existence and kind of note that the city does have measures to promote sustainability. And we thought either having some of the commissioners, me and Jeremy as well, and some members of the office spearheading those workshops would be a wonderful idea, and we just wanted to see what your thoughts would be on that.
Sounds great to me. Thank you for thinking about that, and I'm sure most of us up here would be glad to participate however we can, and maybe Mr. Jones, depending on the time of day that those are scheduled, but great, fabulous idea. Thank you for, because we need to reach the next generation especially, so yeah, thank you. Great idea.
You may also want to reach out to the kids that did those wonderful fold-outs, the scout troop. Those are very impressive, and I think a great way of communicating the complex topic of climate change in a way that elementary students can understand.
Maybe you want to pass your fold-out around to the people here. Or up here. It's really impressive. Looks like this took a lot of work. How long did it take to do each one of those? Half an hour, maybe? Oh, okay. Right.
We can't hear the comments from the public unless,
Oh, I'm sorry, can you come up to the,
well, this is,
it's not agendized.
it's not an agendized item.
Oh,
so-
okay, I'm sorry, we apparently can't, but we'll pass it around. It's very impressive, thank you. Any other comments, or?
So, Chairperson Pington, we do have some staff comments. I just want to report on the success of the latest clothing swap event that happened last week. We had 53 participants who donated and swapped. We collected 238 pounds of clothing. About 10 pounds of that will be recycled, but the rest of it was swapped. And any clothes that remained at the end of the clothing swap will actually go into the repair cafe too, so they're going to be continually used. And the next clothing swap will be on March 2nd from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Grandview Library. And we'd just like to remind the commissioners and anybody listening that we are looking for volunteers for the repair cafe this weekend from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Library Connection at Adams Square. We have primarily looking for repairers. So far we have 9 volunteers signed up, and volunteers can be gardeners, knife sharpeners, sewers, tinkers, woodworkers, electronics fixers, jewelry fixers, etc., etc. And we would ask volunteers to give their time from 9 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And they'll receive breakfast and snacks, and they can also bring an item to repair if they wish to do so. And then the next repair cafe is planned for March 9th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Probably, not definite, but probably at Montrose Library. So,
How have you recruited the repair people in the past? I'm just curious.
we worked with the organization that did the repair cafes in Pasadena, and we used that network to help us.
David, what was that date in March?
So the next clothing swap is March 2nd at Grandview Library, and the next repair cafe is March 9th, most probably at Montrose Library.
Thank you.
For the repair cafe, are the repairers bringing their own tools and things like that?
So yes, we don't provide those. The repairers will bring their own
Okay.
stuff.
Just had a couple quick comments if nobody else does. I gave a presentation to the South Pasadena Equivalent Commission to this. Thought it was very interesting. They have a city council member who comes and gives an update to the commission. I've never seen that structure. I thought that was very interesting, but it led me to think maybe we should make periodic updates or brief reports to the city council ourselves, and I'm wondering if that's something you could possibly talk about agendizing, David. Just some comments, we can invite all the commissioners or have one person report, but just things like how sometimes we're out of sync with city council, how sometimes reports have gone directly to council and didn't come here through here. One thing I would also like to ask is I still like to see the specifications, if I can, for the core products that the city buys. I know they gave a purchasing presentation, but still don't have all the specifications. And so that's the type of item I would like to present to the city council. Let's see what else. Oh, also, I've gone to a couple of other cities adjacent to LA. For my day job with the City of LA, sanitation sponsors 6 donation drives, and I was appealing to other cities to see if they would like to synchronize and do the same drives at the same times, although the beneficiaries would be local organizations. So, for example, our blanket and sock drive is going on now. Pretty much everything we collect goes to homeless shelters or the equivalent, but we also collect non-perishable food, toiletries, clothing, toys, and surprisingly, one of the most popular is we collect condiment packets, the little packets with condiments and utensils, that if you've ever had a delivered meal, everybody's seems to have a drawer full of those, and that's been one of our most popular. But what I'll do is I'll send you the schedule. They're each 2 months in duration, because, you know, people live in one city, shop in another, visit in another, so I just thought it would be great if everybody were synchronized. Basically, we just repurpose some curbside bins. We put those in city buildings open to the public's lobbies. And then we also have donation drop-off bins at our sanitation yard, so you can literally drive up and make a donation. So just wanted to throw that out as a possibility. Thank you.
One thing I forgot to mention, since we're on announcements, I'll remind the community that Walk by Glendale does have our annual Holiday Lights Ride coming up on December 17th. So that's at 4:30. We'll be meeting at Nibley Park. It's family friendly. It's largely attended by young kids. So we invite anybody to attend. It's open to the public. We'll be serving hot chocolate at a neighbor's home nearby at the conclusion of the ride. And so decorate your bikes, get your helmets ready, put air in those tires, and please join us on the 17th at 4:30 at Nibley Park. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to mention an event I actually attended last weekend that I thought was a pretty neat event. David was there as well. This was a tree planting on the Riverwalk, the Glendale Riverwalk. It was on Saturday from 9 to 1. A really well done event organized by the Glendale Parks and Open Space Foundation. We planted around 15 different trees, and there was a really good turnout of people too. I was very impressed with that. And the soil there, I will say, I was digging. I know, Mr. Meek, you were there as well. Quite hard and compact soil, so it took quite a lot of effort to make those holes for them. So, anyways, if you're down there and you're walking on the trail, it's the section that's between DreamWorks and the 134 overpass or bridge over the LA River, and there's a great, big bank on the side there with all the trees that we planted. It's pretty well done. Pretty well done event. So if this comes up again, I'll make sure to mention it here at the commission, and would encourage more people to come out, because it was very, very rewarding to see all the trees planted at the end of the day. Anyways, that's all.
I guess that concludes comments.
Item number 4, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items within the jurisdiction of the Sustainability Commission. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Sustainability Commission members may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The matter may be referred to staff for investigation and report. We do not have any cards and we do not have any speakers. Under item number 5, action items, we don't have any action items. Item number 6, under reports and information, 6A, legislative update.
Chairperson Pinkerton and Commissioners, I think one of the things you asked us to do was to do a legislative update to the Commission. So today what I'd like to do is introduce Stephanie from the Management Services Office. Stephanie works with our lobbyists up in Sacramento, tracking legislations based on the City Council's legislative platform. So I just thought it'd be a good opportunity for Stephanie to introduce herself to the commissions, talk about a few legislative things that she's been following, and be able to answer some questions. But this is not a full legislative update, but I'd just like to introduce Stephanie to the commission.
Hi there, can you hear me on here?
Is that what-
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the light's on, but thank you so much. Good evening, Sustainability Commission. Thank you for having me. Thank you, David. My name is Stephanie Makhlian. I work at the City Manager's Office. I work on legislation, special projects, and communication. Tonight, I'll be talking a little bit about our legislative platform and some of the bills that may pertain to you and the Commission. The primary objective of the legislative platform is for the City Council to adopt official city positions on specific legislative issues, including proposed state initiatives at the start or end of a legislative session. The legislative platform will streamline the approval process by providing staff clear direction on pertinent issues. The platform is developed and maintained using goals and objectives adopted by the City Council, a review of legislative priorities, input from council and staff, research on law and pending legislation, as well as discussions with local legislative staff and city attorney. That being said, I'll go over the legislative platform to date that we will review in 2024 with the City Council. And this has about 9 tenets, and these tenets are fiscal responsibility, economic vibrancy, informed and engaged community, safe and healthy community, balanced quality housing, community services and facilities, infrastructure and mobility, arts and culture, and sustainability. Sustainability tenet states this. For many years, Glendale has embraced sustainability efforts given current and future environmental challenges. The city continuously seeks out new technology and innovation to foster and promote sustainability and is among the first public agencies to successfully implement sustainability improvements such as landfill gas to energy system, curbside recycling, storm drain catch basin inserts, energy saving retrofits, and the list goes on. As such, the city supports the environmentally friendly legislation and urban sustainability. That being said, looking at our legislative platform for this year that was approved by City Council earlier in July, we have the following bills that we looked into that were chaptered for 2024. I'll go over them briefly. AB 1132 by Assemblymember Friedman, which pertains to solar energy systems and permit fees. AB 1526, Committee on Natural Resources, Public Resources, which requires a producer responsibility organization under SB 54 to schedule and remit funds owed to local governments. SB 676, which we're all familiar with, which is the local ordinance and regulations drought-tolerant landscaping. SB 613 by SEARTO, organic waste, reduction goals. And AB 1572, potable water non-functional turf. Non-functional turf, as the bill states, is solely ornamental and not for recreational use. And I'll go ahead and leave it there. And I'll take questions. I do have an update about an event that's coming up that may be of interest regarding Prop 65, but I'll go ahead and take questions now, and I'll announce the event after.
I'm sorry, I just didn't, thank you for that. I
course.
didn't catch the title of the organics legislation.
Oh,
Was
yes.
it 1383 or no, something else?
It's SB 613 by Senator SEARTO, organic waste reduction goals,
Okay.
local jurisdictions, low population waiver.
Oh, okay, great, thank
And
you.
I can go ahead and share these with David as well.
I have a question. That 1852 is the one pertaining to the artificial turf, is that correct?
The non-functional
The
turf,
non-functional, right.
AB 1572.
1572, okay. What does that encompass exactly when it says non-functional? So they're talking about non-athletic fields, right? Use of artificial turf for other areas? Is that what that?
So I'll defer to our city attorney on.
okay.
So the non-functional turf that is in the bill language states the following: that is solely ornamental and not regularly used for recreational purposes or for civic or community events.
Okay, that's fine. I don't.
And members of the commission, Commission Chair Pinkerton, as I recall from the presentation we had from the league, identifying some of these non-functional areas would be such as medians. And there were
Yes.
some other areas that are sort of non-functional around, sidewalks. So that's, I think, what they were trying to identify as, once that infrastructure is provided, that they would not use potable water for purposes of maintaining those areas.
And we can send additional information regarding all of these to the commission, so a much more thorough insight into the different aspects. I just want to let Stephanie just to talk. She's not an expert in all the different bits of legislation. She just wanted to provide an overview to the commission.
Okay, in that case, I was going to ask a question or two, but I will wait to see the report then, I guess, would be best. Yeah, thanks.
I do have a broad question, not to get into the weeds. Thank you for the presentation. Good to see you. This was a great idea. Thanks for the updates. I guess I'm curious, you had alluded to some kind of process that council goes through to identify which pieces of legislation they want to endorse or advance or vote on. Is that an annual process that happens here at the city? And is that, I think you mentioned the month of July is when they...
This year, yes.
Okay.
So we reviewed and we looked at, and the legislative platform was passed and approved by City Council in July of this year. And typically that will happen at the start or middle of a legislative season, and it does happen annually.
Okay.
And this is the that legislative platform, the tenets that I mentioned, that's the basis of making those decisions.
Okay, I'm curious, David and Jillian, cover your ears, but I'm curious how the commission can get their eyes on what these proposed legislations are so that we can make a formal recommendation to council on which items we would like to see advanced. So is there a process or window within that summer legislative season where we can submit recommendations and have that go to council before council sees these items?
So throughout the year, as items come up, please feel free to reach out to David, and he'll let me know of items that the commission is looking into, whether that's specific legislative action items or state budget, anything related. So something that we were able to accomplish through conversations this year was, thanks to Assemblymember Friedman, we were able to get funding for Fremont Park. That was a need for the city, and that came out of conversations with Parks Department, understanding what that need was, and making that ask to the legislator. So that's an example, and so the door is open for whatever the commission may have in mind.
So the calendar is more open than it seems.
So
I heard July as like a point in which decisions are made, but it sounds more like this is on an ongoing basis.
I would refer to the California legislative calendar.
Okay.
I think that's more aligned to what you're asking about.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Just a note for staff is that now that I know this, I'll be interested in encouraging the commissioners to look at legislation and bring forward formal recommendations to council to endorse or not endorse particular legislation.
Follow-up question. Mr. Jones, do you subscribe to that calendar? Are you?
I do not.
Okay. And then a question for Stephanie, if I could. So is it just a consensus after discussion by council as far as recommending, to issue a motion in support of a piece of legislation? Is that how that's done? Does your office weigh in on that?
It's a variety of factors, but that the legislative platform that is set and approved by council is that North Star that we follow.
But for example, like SB 54, For people that don't know, that's basically a piece of legislation that says different types of packaging has to achieve a certain recycling rate, or that type of packaging can no longer be sold in California. And it's talking about setting up an outside, probably nonprofit group that manages all the data and interacts with the manufacturers. So that's just kind of a technical implementation part of SB 54. So would they just take one example recently, if you have one. Was there debate, if you can reveal, or is something like this just kind of routinely supported?
So, Commissioner Pington, the actual process of how City Council decides what the legislative platform is, we can get into that a bit further. I don't think we have that information tonight, but we can get that information. We can share that with the Commission, how that process works, how Council comes to a decision on what the legislative platform is. And I know we have interaction with our lobbyists in Sacramento, so I think it's a bigger picture, but I'll be happy to find out and bring a report back to the Commission on how that is done.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
If there are no more questions, item number 6B, project update, bicycle transportation plan.
Commissioner Pington, I'd like to ask Arazu from our planning department to introduce this item and to introduce the consultant who will be doing the presentation tonight for the Commission.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commission members. We appreciate for the time today to be here to provide you an update about bicycle transportation plan and seek your valuable comments and recommendations. As you may recall, the existing bicycle transportation plan was adopted on October 2012, recognizing the evolving needs of our community. On February 2022, City Council directed staff to initiate the update of bicycle transportation plan. Our goal is to create a visionary framework for the next 20 years and outlining plans for the planning, development, design, and maintenance of a safe, convenient, and inviting bike network through Glendale. To ensure a comprehensive and inclusive approach, we have formed a dedicated project development team. This team consists of a diverse range of participants, including representatives from citywide departments, community members, regional stakeholders, and members of the TPC and Sustainability Commission. Their insight and experience have been played a crucial role in shaping and informing the update of bicycle transportation plan. Our goal has been to engage our community in development of bicycle transportation plan. To do so, we had done an extensive outreach, and some of the events we participated to are including Bike Safety Day at Pacific Park, Earth Day celebration at GCC, and the last two open houses in Spar Heights Community Center and Adult Recreation Center. Our preliminary bike network interactive map has been available on the BTP website for public feedback until today. To provide further details on bicycle transportation plan update and progress, I am pleased to introduce our consultant project manager, Mr. Sam Former from Bro-Happold. We are looking forward to hear your comments and inputs to create a more sustainable and accessible transportation network for residents of Glendale. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we see it.
Great. All right. Thank you, Arzu, Madam Chair, and the I'm getting a little feedback. Okay, I'll just move on. My name is Sam Fromer. I am a mobility consultant with Bro-Happold. I am the project manager for the update to the bicycle transportation plan. And I'm here tonight to give you a project update, as Arzu described. And just to echo what she said, we're here to collaboratively create a 20-year vision for the planning, development, design, and maintenance of a safe, convenient, inviting bike network for all of Glendale. I want to just really emphasize that this is a 20-year plan. This is our opportunity for the next 2 decades to create a bicycle system and network for the city of Glendale. When you think about how much has changed in the past 20 years and the amount of work that has been done in the city and in the state, and now we think ahead for the next 20 years, this is our opportunity to shape those 20 years and put the ideas and recommendations that we want for the city down into this plan. So first, I'm going to talk about project context, our safety analysis, our public engagement goals, how we came up with our preliminary network that has been online and shared extensively, and then our next steps. So first, the context. We're building, as Arzu said, on the 2012 bike plan. That bike plan relied primarily on sharrows, which are those double chevron markings on the ground that don't provide any protection or separation from general traffic. And then in general, as we know, the city of Glendale is a diverse community. It's facing challenges related to climate change, and it's got some challenging hills. And we've got some exciting projects coming our way, including the Verdugo Wash and Metro BRT projects. So all of that starts to form the basis of where our work has begun. And just to build on that, Glendale is a great place for biking. It has amazing weather. It's Southern California. It's dense. It has an mostly intact street grid. It's got mixed use. You have short distances between where people live and where people work or want to go to school or go to the library, go shopping, right? And this is especially true in the downtown area, right? As you go further north, you're constrained by the mountains, it gets hillier. So you have also some real barriers, right? Because of where Glendale sits, it's at the, where the beginning of the San Fernando Valley, you're squeezed between the Verdugo Mountains. So you do have, that's where all of the highways come through, that's where all the water comes through. That's why, you have all of these different barriers that also help to separate the city. The Verdugo Wash is called out here as a current barrier, but as I hope you're aware, there's a long-term plan to turn that into a linear park and turn that into a future connector, which will form one of the north-south backbones of the bike plan. Just to go into the existing network a little bit, as I said, it relies almost entirely on sharrows. It's pretty disconnected, low coverage, doesn't feel safe or enjoyable. In total, you have less than 10 miles of Class 2 bike lanes. That's what you would consider your standard bike lane, usually painted next to the parking lane. 10 miles is not a lot. The city of Glendale is about 10 miles from top to bottom. These are those dark green lines on the map here. So again, just driving home the point, it's not a very useful or connected or safe network as it stands today. Just a quick primer on bike lane types. I will bring this up again. I already mentioned Class 2 bike lanes, but I'll go from left to right. Class 1 bike lanes are multi-use paths. Those are off-street, generally through parks or along rivers, or fully separated from the roadway. You have Class 4 protected bike lanes. Those generally exist within the roadway from curb to curb, but that are protected by parking or other barriers. Class 2 bike lanes, that's what I was just talking about, your standard bike lane. A Class 2 climbing lane is when you have a bike lane in the uphill direction to provide some segregation from moving traffic. And then in the downhill direction, usually due to width constraints, you use sharrows, which brings us to Class 3 bike routes, which are the sharrows, and then Class 3 bike boulevards, which use extensive traffic calming, like raised intersections, speed humps, traffic diverters, traffic circles to really slow down traffic, reduce the amount of through traffic to create a really safe and inviting biking and walking environment. This has broad safety benefits when implemented correctly. Okay, am I stopping for questions or should I wait for questions at the end?
I'll ask a question. Thank you, Sam. On this page here with the bike lane types, I guess for for our audience's edification, for us, can you speak a little more to what's included in a Class 3 bike boulevard?
Yeah, so these are reserved for generally low volume residential or quiet back streets. And then you add additional treatments to make, to reduce through traffic. So there's even fewer cars on the road, and then to slow down the traffic that remains on the street so that when you're biking on it, it feels safe and comfortable, and it's clear that the priority there is for you and not the vehicles driving through. So what that means is it's generally a narrow street with low volumes. Then you use things like mid-block speed humps. You could use raised intersections, which is basically a speed hump at the crosswalk. In this photo, you have a traffic circle like you do on Maple Street in Glendale. You can use traffic diverters, which is generally like a barrier at the intersection that forces cars to turn left or right, but cyclists can continue straight. So that further reduces the volumes on the street. And then you can use things like chicanes, diverters, and bump outs. And those are all a chicane or a bump out. Bump out happens at the intersection. A chicane happens mid-block. It's where the curb comes out into the parking lane, and generally that slows traffic by forcing people to slow down and go around it instead of continuing straight down the street. Does that help to clarify?
Yeah, that does. And I'm glad you mentioned Maple, because it sounds like that might be a street that, is somewhat of low-hanging fruit, if you will, where we could more easily convert that. I'm not looking at the proposed map, and I don't have that in front of me, so I'm not sure what it's proposed to be turned into, but, I have walked that street, I have biked that street, and I do appreciate the features that are along there. So that sounds like it's going to be somewhat of a new, that would be a new type of street, calming that we would have here in Glendale. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think, yeah, exactly. Maple is, maybe one of the closer things you have to that already naturally. And that is designated in the current map, preliminary map, as a bike boulevard. I just want to emphasize again, and I'll have some more, I have another slide on this later on in the presentation that shows some photos of this, but yeah, again, it has broad safety implications, not just for people biking, but people walking and driving.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll move into our safety analysis. We did a look back at 10 years of crash data to align with the pedestrian study. I want to say that a typical crash analysis looks at 5 years of recent data. We extended that out for 10 years based on feedback that we got from our project development team, and also, again, to align with the pedestrian study that was completed a couple of years ago. And then we also looked not only at injury and fatality crashes, but property damage only, or PDO crashes. That was another recommendation that we got from our PDT. And through our analysis, we highlighted 10 primary safety corridors, or high crash corridors is another way of thinking with these. These, as you can see, are all in downtown. South of Glen Oaks, including Glen Oaks itself. And I think anyone that's familiar with Glendale and the streets of Glendale, this shouldn't be surprising, right? This is where all your destinations are. This is the area that's surrounded by the highways. It's where the most number of people work and live. People go shopping there on the weekend and throughout the week as well. right? And then it's also because of these connections to the highways, you have a lot of on and off traffic. The streets are very wide to accommodate rush hour traffic, but then are fairly empty or free flow during the rest of the day, which can encourage speeding. So this top 10, list should not surprise anyone from Glen Oaks, Colorado, Broadway, San Fernando, Chevy Chase, right? So this is a really important input into the way that we think about how can we improve safety and connectivity, not just for people biking, but people also walking and driving.
Sam, a quick question, if you don't mind. I just saw a presentation for bicycle proposal for South Pass, and they said that most accidents occur at intersections. Is that your finding?
Yeah, that's true nationally, and usually that's because of turning movements. By that I just mean people turning left and right, and left turns tend to be more dangerous than right turns. Right, because when you're making a left turn, you have to be paying attention to traffic that's coming, so you might maybe not paying attention to people in the crosswalk or other things that are happening.
Is it true that there's a proposal to undo right turn on red in California to partially address this? Have you heard that? I'm just curious.
I can't speak to the state, but it is definitely a recommendation that we're considering as part of this plan, not necessarily citywide, although that could also be an option, but maybe on certain streets or in certain areas of the city, certainly in downtown. Right turns are like as you pointed out, intersections are more dangerous than mid-block, or have higher concentration of crashes, and right turn bans on red have significant safety benefits.
Great, thank you.
Sure thing. We also looked, as I said, we looked at 10 years of data. So this is the crashes over time. We've generally seen a decrease in crashes over time in the city. This mirrors the county, which is that blue line. And that could be for a variety of reasons. There, a citywide safety education program in 2018, potentially an overall decline in biking in general, and then the pandemic, of course, changed the way people get around and when they get around. So I just want to emphasize that while the number of crashes have gone down, that's not necessarily a good thing. That as I said, like one of the explanatory reasons is that it's possible that fewer people are biking as well. Based on the data that's available, we can't draw conclusive connections between cause and effect, but we can generally point to these causatory factors. So we do, I'm not including everything that we've done here in detail, but I just want to say we've looked at a lot of different factors, not just crashes, but connectivity, looking at equity, trip potential, where the most number of trips that happen under 3 miles, looking at survey comments that we got from the public. And generally what this all points to is the areas that have the most destinations, that have the most jobs, that have the most people, that also have the most crashes, that have the greatest concentration of equity communities, and also where we got the most public comments, all overlap. And that's basically in West Glendale and downtown, right? And that makes sense intuitively if you're, again, familiar with the city of Glendale, which all of you are, much more so than I am, as I'm not a resident. And this is also, with the area with the greatest concentration of transit, it's flat. And so I think that as we continue to develop this bike plan and prioritization, which is part of the next steps, we're really going to be looking at how can we improve connectivity and safety most in these high priority areas. So now I'm going to move into public engagement. We've done an extensive and continue to do extensive public outreach and involvement. As I mentioned, we have our project development team. They've been invaluable in providing insight and getting us connected to the community, providing recommendations, getting the word out our various outreach efforts. We've done pop-up events, gone to other, citywide events and tabled there. We've had our own community open houses. We had an online survey. We have our online map, which, as Arzu mentioned, has been up for the past 4 weeks and will be closing tonight, just by coincidence. And we've been getting the word out, again, through the BTB, through multilingual flyers. We've been going through the city's communication networks, email newsletters. We have our own project email list where we've emailed people who have signed up. We've emailed them directly, press releases, social media. We have the project webpage. So we've really been trying very hard to reach as many people in as many ways as possible. We've even, gone to libraries and bike shops to hand out flyers. And as I mentioned, we did a survey, online survey, as one of our early outreach efforts back in the spring and into the early summer. We had it in 4 different languages. We asked 17 questions about how people felt about biking in Glendale and their priorities, some basic demographic information. We got over 400 respondents. I don't know if you do a lot of surveys, but 400 people is a lot. And in fact, we had a couple of open-ended questions and we got over 300. So that's just like that blank box. I don't know, when I respond to a survey online, I generally skip those questions if I can. And we got over 300 responses to those questions. So people are super engaged. They had a lot to say. They gave us a lot of great information. And what we heard over and over and over and over again are people feel unsafe. They want to feel safe on the streets. They want to be able to get where they're going, and they want to have usable bike infrastructure. So that's safety, connectivity, and infrastructure. This slide sort of just reemphasizes those points. And then our PDT, again, has been super valuable. We've met 3 times so far. We'll probably be meeting again sometime in the early next year to go over recommendations again. And they're, again, they've been such a wonderful group to get to know and work with, and are just super professional and knowledgeable. And just, Glendale is a very civically engaged community, and it is a joy to work with you all. And beyond that, we've had a ton of events. We've talked to nearly over 600 people. We've reached now well over, I would say, 600 people online with the online map. We've gone to different city events, the Fall Festival, the Cruise Night, Earth Day celebration. And then earlier in November, we had 2 open houses, as Arzu had mentioned, at Spar Heights and the ARC, where over 80 people came. It was busy the whole time. Your state senator came and gave feedback. It was really active. People are, as I said, really involved, really care, and we continue to get a lot of feedback on our draft recommendations and the preliminary bike network, which we're working on integrating now into the next round of edits. And as I said, the web map has been open for the last 4 weeks. It's closing tonight. We've gotten, I think, over 160 comments and responses on the web map, so that's also been super valuable. And so working with our PDT and the information that we've gotten in our outreach efforts, we've developed a series of project goals. As I have already emphasized, safety, connectivity, and accessibility are really at the top. And then we're looking at also equity. Implementability is a really important one. We want to be ambitious, but we want to be able to build or put together a plan that the city can build. And then, any bike plan will have positive impacts on public health and the environment, which is, I know, near and dear to the Sustainability Commission's heart. Now I'm going to talk about how we've gotten to our preliminary bike network recommendations. We start with our project goals. As any good planner, you start with, what are your guiding principles? And then we drew on some basic network principles, which I'll talk in more details. Spiderweb and connected neighborhoods, basically like a couple of superhighways, and then people being able to get around locally. And then once you have identified where the bike lane should be, using local and national guidance from the Federal Highway Administration, NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and Caltrans, determining what is the safest bike facility that will fit on the identified corridor. And then we've been in our drafting phase for a while now, right? Based on all of that information, we came up with our first draft. We went then to city staff, the planning and public works, developed a second draft, which we brought to the PDT, and then now we're at the current draft, which has been up online for the last month. I presented this to the TPC just before Thanksgiving, and now I'm standing here before you, looking for your feedback, and then we will integrate all of the current feedback into our next draft, which we will present to City Council. So just a little more information on those network principles. The Spiderweb, basically, connecting long distances, getting from, centers out to outer neighborhoods on safe and clear corridors, and then connected neighborhoods. Glendale has a lot of wonderful little neighborhood centers with local shopping and dining and libraries and other schools and destinations. So being able to get around your neighborhood in a safe way by bike. And I honestly think like that is the greatest potential for this bike plan. I think there's a lot of people that are going to say, I could never bike to work, but there are people all over the city who say, I could bike the 4 or 5 or 6 blocks to, take my kids to the library or go shopping or meet a friend for a drink or dinner, that type of thing. I think there's a huge potential for that in the city. You have such wonderful distribution of these little neighborhood centers. So just to go into the details a little bit more, our first draft network was based on our safety analysis, where those destinations are, connectivity analysis, and then the public input that we got in our early outreach, which we've mapped. And so when we overlaid all of that, we identified where we think the bike network should be. And then, as I said, we used national guidance to determine what type of facilities should be on that corridor. And that is based on the road, on the features of the road. So if we say that, this corridor or this street should have a bike facility, based on the speed of traffic, the volume of traffic, the width of the road, local land use context, what is the safe type of facility for that? So if it's a quiet neighborhood street, that might be a Shero. If it's central or Grand or Colorado or Glen Oaks, then that, it's probably going to be a Class 4 protected facility. So just as a reminder, as I said, I would bring this up again. Here's our existing network today, and then this is the preliminary network. And this network covers the entire city, strives to be safe and connected, adds a huge number of bike lanes all over the city, so you can bike across the city. As I had mentioned earlier, it relies on the Verdugo Wash as a wonderful north-south connection. The Metro BRT project will also be a great east-west connection. And as I had mentioned, using a lot of bike boulevards to calm traffic on some of these side streets, especially in downtown, so that people can avoid some of the more, the wider, higher traffic streets for their, to get around and bike on some of these quieter streets. I threw this in here just in case anyone needed a reminder of our bike lane types. And then, as I said, here are some more photos of the bike boulevard. You can see in this top photo, this tree that's sticking out from the curb, that's a chicane. This bottom photo is a diverter where, you can see the cars coming towards you have to turn right, but people on bikes can continue straight, right? And similarly for where the direction from the photo is being taken, right? And so that reduces the volume on the street while allowing cyclists to continue through.
Sam, could I interject with a question? This lower photo photograph. I've heard that not requiring bicyclists to make full stops at stop signs is a much safer option for bicyclists, and it's just easier for most. Would this be a scenario where the biker would not have to stop? I forgot what that's called.
Yeah, that's called an Idaho stop because Idaho pioneered this. Well, in this photo, there isn't an indication that you need to stop, although I think there should be, since people would be turning right into a crosswalk. Generally that is an Idaho stop is, or if cyclists aren't required to stop at a stop sign, it's treated as a yield sign. So if there's crossing traffic or people in the crosswalk, they must stop. And otherwise, if you're biking, it's much easier to just keep going because you're pedaling under your own power and proceed cautiously through an intersection. And then some communities also do this with red lights, where they treat a red light as a stop sign instead of a mandatory stop.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. And then just bringing up the climbing lanes again, which becomes important in the northern part of the city, right? This is in the uphill direction, you have dedicated space because you're going to be moving much slower than general traffic. And then in the downhill direction, you can take the lane and it's a class 3 signed. And that's generally because the streets are narrow and it's not, necessary to, take away a parking lane if there is a parking lane there. Sometimes there isn't. So that's just a little more detail on that. And then finally, next steps. So as I said, we've had our open houses, we've got our WebMap comments. I've already presented at TPC. We're here tonight. And so in January 9th, we'll be presenting to City Council. In concert with that, we are eventually going to be, developing a criteria for project phasing, and then we'll be identifying, priority projects. And I think generally the direction we'll be heading in is looking for some very immediate wins to improve safety and connectivity, in the first 1 to 3 years, and then phasing out from there, some major priority projects, and then, midterm projects and long-term projects. With that, stop presenting.
Probably a dumb question. For the Verdugo Wash, how does that work? Is there concrete? Are you capping sections? Is there building like shelves along the walls? I'm completely unclear how that happens.
Yeah, there's an entire vision plan right now for the Verdugo Wash, and depending, the wash has, takes on many different forms as you move from the LA River up into the Verdugo Mountains, and so it becomes narrower, it can become steeper or deeper, and so depending on the typology of the wash, it'll have, there are different ideas of how to address that, but basically imagine like a boardwalk over the waterway. Right? Because then in a storm event, you need clearance for water to be, to fill the wash. And then there will be access points, so ramps to connect the wash or the linear park that will be in the wash to the street. And those are also identified in the vision plan. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. One quick other, the presentation I saw in South Pasadena was very interesting because they said clearly there's not money to execute, significant plans like this all at once. But it was interesting because they said they try to integrate, well, Cheryl's mostly, but sometimes it's separated lanes while they're patching streets or doing other improvements to streets. Is that something you envision? I mean, that does not put you closer to completely connected system because patching may occur, in areas that are not geographically connected. But is that something kind of a secondary plan for this too?
Yeah, definitely, and that's common practice now, is when you're doing a street repaving, or other types of capital improvements or maintenance, you would refer to your bike plan or your pedestrian safety plan or other relevant planning documents and integrate those changes as you're doing your regular maintenance on your streets, and that would definitely be recommended as part of this.
Great, thank you.
And I think Public Works already thinks in that. I'm pretty sure Public Works already works that way anyway.
I had a question about the implementation. Like, okay, these maps have various dashed lines depending on what type of bike lane they're looking at, but did they get into the weeds at all as far as how they were going to achieve that? Like I was looking especially at Chevy Chase Drive in South Glendale. I know from living in that part of the city that's the major thoroughfare for that part of the city. Is used by evacuation vehicles, emergency vehicles, things like that. And most of that it's 35 miles an hour. So were they envisioning reducing that down from 2 lanes in each direction to 1, or were they going to try to use up some of that really wide sidewalk that there is in that area, or is that just something that hasn't been explored yet?
Yeah, as a part we're thinking through all of those issues right now with city staff. This has been a hot topic of conversation for us, so thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, we're looking at all of those things, like in some cases you can reduce travel lane width and squeeze in a bike lane. In some cases you might have to remove either a parking lane or a travel lane in order to accommodate the bike facility. And what we're doing now, as we work on the next draft of the bike network, is we will be highlighting to policymakers where those the allocation of road space may be required, and what, at least at a very high level, some of the potential impacts of that could be. Since it is a citywide bike plan, it's not going to get much more detailed than that. And as we've discussed at length with city staff, many of these projects may require further study that is just beyond the scope of a citywide planning effort.
Sam, thank you for the presentation. I've really enjoyed working with you and the rest of the team on this for the last 6 months or so through the PDT as a representative of the commission. I'm just going to speak generally. I don't have very pointed questions or points to make today, other than that, this is I think a really timely plan to be working on right now, especially since we're working on the climate action and adaptation plan concurrently. I think there's a lot of elements of that. They're going to be sort of bolstering the efforts of implementing this right here, this bike plan. So I'm hoping the two can kind of work together in that regard. Yeah, I think it's just the goal, I would say, with this, speaking again broadly, is not to kind of immediately transform the city into this like biking haven. I want to make sure that folks understand that. I think we do want to improve biking conditions for everyone, but safety is paramount, and bicyclists will reap the benefits of this, but also drivers and pedestrians. I mean, this is for everyone that uses our streets, and it's a 20-year plan. So this I think, to maybe the outsider, they look at this proposed plan and might think, wow, like this is going to radically change everything overnight. And I just want to emphasize that we are going to be working on this step by step, phasing it in. Yes, there'll be that low-hanging fruit that we'll try and get out there as quick as we can. But for anyone watching or tuning in tonight, I think that this is, I think, very ambitious and very hopefully exciting to see what could come of this. And as was mentioned earlier, I think there are folks out there I've talked to that would love to be able to hop on a bike and comfortably comfortably bike down to the grocery store or bike to school or bike to work. They live in Glendale, and I myself am one of them. I biked to this meeting tonight along Wilson. It was a little harrowing in the dark, but I have my flashers on and my lights and all that, and it's maybe in the future it looks like I could hop down onto Colorado potentially and use a bike lane. So those are just a couple comments. I think there's work being done through GWP too with I believe there's like a $300 subsidy or rebate for e-bikes, so for folks out there like myself that are interested in using an e-bike, that's another avenue to get involved in this process. You can buy yourself an e-bike, and we'll be taking advantage of these improved facilities here very soon. So I guess that's just my general overall comments. I'm really excited about this. I would love to see 100% of this happen alongside the Verdugo Wash project, and might be waiting a while for that, but regardless, I want to see this come to fruition. So I think regarding the map, I was curious. I mean, I don't expect you to speak in detail about this, but have you seen a lot of feedback already on the web map? Are you getting, have you gotten good feedback on that from the last month? Okay.
Yeah, we've gotten, I think, over 160 individual comments. A lot of it focused on downtown and some of the major corridors there. Why were certain streets left out? Why were certain streets included? We want to see something here and there. So yeah, we're still sorting through that. There's been a big push in the past couple of days on social media and other outlets to remind people that in this week that the map is closing today. So we've been also getting a bunch more of additional comments just in the past few days. So we're combing through all of that information, and we'll be integrating that along with the feedback that we get here tonight and from the TPC.
Excellent. And that reminds me too, I did want to commend you all and the city staff on the outreach efforts for this plan. I know that's a high priority for our city council, and so when this ultimately comes to them, I know that's something they're going to be looking at very closely. So I think it's been great. I've attended a lot of those outreach events myself, and it's been wonderful to be part of that community. Have other people there so excited about it, like those of us working on this are. So great. Well, I guess I might have some more comments as we continue, but for now, that's all.
I guess I'll go next. I also wanted to thank staff and Sam as well for the amazing work that you've put into this. As someone who was involved in the 2012 bike plan, and quite frankly, just have been disappointed in the progress we've made since that plan was adopted. I'm very excited to see a very different, refreshed outlook on what our pursuit should be as a city. I'm also, I love the photo that you've used in the slide. That's me on the cover page, by the way, on the river walk. So I have a few comments, a few questions, so please bear with me, but this is something that's extremely important for me. So I'm looking at slide 11, which runs us through the bike crash analysis, which I think is really important because, Cole mentioned his struggles with biking in the city. I share those struggles as somebody who walks and bikes in the city. We are constituents who are very engaged in the community and engaged in this process, but there are many people who don't have the luxury of attending these meetings. And, while I am grateful to be able to bike to the grocery store because I choose to not drive that day, there are many people in our community that bike because they have to out of necessity. And I think of all the maps, this reflects what is going on in the community and the reasons why we need to do what we need to do to make our streets safer. So I asked for this crash analysis to be done. I'm not completely surprised by what is seen on this map. It actually very much mirrors the crash analysis that was done for the pedestrian master plan in terms of the topmost dangerous corridors in our city. And the ones that stick out to me particularly in this particular context is Glendale Avenue and Brand Boulevard and Colorado. So my question to whether it's Sam or staff is why through this process we have come to a map that does not show any improvements along Glendale, Brand, or that segment of Colorado that's broken up between Glendale and Central.
Yeah, thank you, Alec. I can start with that. Yeah, as we've worked through the drafting process with city staff, we've determined, that these corridors aren't suitable for protected bike facilities because of either impact on the loss of parking or a loss of a through lane. And these corridors, especially Glendale, connect directly to the freeway. They would have significant impacts on traffic and congestion. And the way that we've tried to address that is to shift to parallel, quieter streets. For Glendale, that's Adams Street. And then we've also, specifically for Brand, there's some challenges around the geometry of the street. There's angled parking, there's bump outs. So, you could potentially fit a class 2 facility, a regular bike lane on Brand. It would probably require changing the parking from angled to parallel, so that would have an impact on the number of parking spaces. It would still just be difficult to fit that in. You would maybe have to mount the curb where the bump outs are, or you would have to rearrange the curb, which is a big undertaking and affects other things like drainage. And in general, our approach has been, we want to be able to focus efforts on places where we can get sort of the know that we can succeed and build these things. And so instead of, trying to fight tooth and nail on every single street, being able to concentrate on some of the other corridors where we think we could have a greater impact. That being said, we are still rethinking this network, and I think we're still looking for very strong north-south and east-west connections in downtown. And so we're, again, here for your feedback and comments.
Thanks, Sam. So I will strongly insist that Glendale be reinserted into the bike plan. As you alluded, in the absence of that corridor having a facility, there is no suitable alternative given the orientation of the streets and given where the existing proposed cycle track on Glendale ends right at the freeway. There is no alternative or parallel route that somebody could use at the end of that protected bike lane. Likewise, there is very limited parking on Glendale Avenue on the west side of the street. From there, arguably all the way down to Wilson. So adjacent to the Bank of America, the Ralphs, the Whole Foods, where currently we have food trucks that are stationed there and some charter buses that park there. Yes, on paper, there is a parking lane there, but I think, and given the disclaimer that we're hearing from Public Works and as part of the staff report, I guess I'm not understanding why some very critical corridors, as I'm outlining with the safety crash analysis, are excluded when we are saying, oh, by the way, any of these improvements that we're going to make need to be further analyzed. So I need to reconcile those two thoughts because it feels like we're excluding something prematurely when we're required to study it anywhere later.
Yeah, we continue to work with city staff on all of these corridors, and one thing that we hear a lot about Glendale, about Colorado, about Brand, about Central, these big streets in downtown that are also, have high concentrations of crashes. And we don't want to lose those thoughts and recommendations in this plan, even if they're not a high priority or in the first couple of years, And so we're also thinking about how we can memorialize these potential corridors if traffic conditions change or if, other priorities shift or in the future. So thinking of things like a constrained recommendation, right? Like maybe right now Glendale is, or Brand or Colorado, from a traffic throughput perspective, makes it extremely difficult and, might not warrant the effort when you could put those efforts towards other corridors. But in the future, if those conditions were to change, what are those thresholds that would then trigger a reconsideration of those corridors? That's something that we're working on with city staff.
Okay, thank you for that. I argue that Glendale, Brand, and Colorado should be complete. The other piece that I wanted to highlight is there are some gaps along some of the corridors. Sonora, to me, is a glaring, there's a gap along that corridor, which I know is an existing green painted bike lane. I think that gap needs to go away. Colorado, I already touched on, which I think is an obvious gap in the network. I'm particularly concerned about Central. I received a text message from somebody who lives in North Glendale that a bicyclist was hit at Good and Central on Friday around 9 or 10 in the morning. So I understand. And by the way, Sam, city staff already knows this. I am a transportation planner, so I know what constraints come with freeway on-ramps and off-ramps, but there has to be some treatment. I'm not going to argue specifically what it should be, but there has to be something. So I don't want to respond to my friend and say that we looked at a bike plan where this street specifically doesn't have any changes given the recent collision that occurred. And based on the statistics that have been shared with us, there's a 9 out of 10 chance that that person that got hit was injured. So I'm very uncomfortable looking at this safety analysis map and saying that, oh, you know what? We're just gonna forget about you at the most challenging locations along a particular corridor. So I want to put that out there because I don't want it on my conscience, and I'm hoping that it doesn't stay on the city's conscience. So those are the specific gaps I was concerned about. I think there are upgrades to existing proposed segments that should be looked at. Duran between Maryland and Central does widen, and I think there's plenty of room for a protected bike lane or a bike lane. There are additional travel lanes along that segment, but I argue that given the traffic counts that not all of those lanes are warranted. Harvard is an existing bike route, but I've challenged staff in the past that those 2 travel lanes are wide enough to accommodate a bike lane. So I would like that to be looked at. And then some additions that I had just off the top. Western is identified in the West Glendale Sustainability Plan for having a bike lane that continues through to all the way down to Riverside, and I don't see that on the current plan. So I do want to call that out. I did see renderings that do demonstrate that it can fit on that bridge that goes over the railroad tracks, which I was pleasantly surprised can happen. So I'd like to make sure that that's included. And then Orange Street in downtown Glendale was on the 2012 bike plan for having bike lanes, and it is not included in this current version. So I wanted to make sure those are noted. And then I did want to make sure we talk about policy because I know this presentation was largely focused on the map and the corridor. I think sidewalk riding should be looked at. Currently, the city of Glendale has a prohibition on sidewalk riding. It is, in my view, a redundancy with state law, which does not allow for unsafe sidewalk riding. And I think in the absence of bike facilities on our streets, now and in the near future, we should reconsider that and stop penalizing people who don't feel safe to ride on the street and feel that the only safe option that they have is to ride on the sidewalk. So I'd like for us to reconsider that as a policy approach. And then there is I know the city of LA and other cities do have a bicycle parking ordinance as far as planning goes. So we would figure out that formula in the planning department, but some parking spots that are required of a development can be transferred or translated into specific bike parking in a development. So my understanding is we don't have that here in the city, and I'd like for us to look at that as well. And then the last thing that I'll touch on is what I'm calling the Public Works disclaimer that was included in our staff report, which essentially says to us that, even though you're adopting this plan, essentially any protected bike lanes that are being proposed as part of this plan need to go through an additional vigorous analysis, outreach, some parallel process that requires additional staffing and funding to implement this plan. I'm not okay with that disclaimer. I've said to staff in the past that other cities have lane reconfiguration guidelines that the city adheres to when looking at projects like the ones that are being proposed, where, if we do need to do a lane reconfiguration, for example, we would look at thresholds that we would meet for average daily traffic, or what that lane reconfiguration does in terms of seconds of delay. And I would like to see us develop and adopt a lane reconfiguration guideline that gives us some freedom for us to implement this plan as it is intended. So yes, there are some corridors that are going to be very difficult. We can use Brand as an example, or Glendale, or Chevy Chase for that matter. But there are some streets in this city that we know have very low volumes. We know through analysis would not create significant delays. And I think those types of facilities or those types of projects should not go through the ringer that these other projects would have to go through. And, you know, given what I'm seeing today and the way in which we are adopting or implementing projects, you know, one example is La Crescenta Avenue. It is a simple lane reconfiguration on a street that has very low volumes, had essentially no delay as a result of those low volumes. And we have been asking for that project and waiting for that project for 5 years. And that is one street that is 1 or 2 miles long. So I look at this plan and I think, oh my God, it's great. I would love to see this in my city and it looks amazing. There is no way, given that Public Works disclaimer, that we would realize this in 20 years. There's absolutely no way that that's going to happen. And I'm trying to figure out what are the ways we can streamline this process so that we can actually see something before Cole or I drop dead. So as a result of a collision or of old age. So I'd like to see something. I'd like for us to work towards something that streamlines a process so that we're not having 15 meetings for every single project. It's not sustainable. We don't have the funding. We don't have the resources. And other cities have done something similar. I know LA is different. We shouldn't just copy paste what that city does. And I know they're often criticized for what they do. But as somebody that works at LADOT, I can tell you that the framework is there. You know, you can plug in the numbers that you feel comfortable with, but there is a framework that you can use and make it work in a way that is comfortable for Glendale, which I know is different from LA. So I will stop talking, but I will reiterate my thanks to staff and Sam for doing this gargantuan effort. And I'll make sure that, you know, we continue to be engaged and advocate for the strongest possible bike plan that is implementable within this 20-year horizon. Thank you for your patience.
I had a couple more things to say actually that came up while Alec was talking. Mostly, my main point is that I really want to emphasize that we need more protected corridors, protected lanes through the downtown area. I was just thinking through, you know, a recent trip I made with my wife. I'm sorry. I'll speak more into the mic. I was just thinking about this past weekend and other weekends I've traveled with my wife from over by Glendale High to the downtown, to the Americana, to the Whole Foods. You know, these are shopping districts. These are areas where there's a lot of things that you can do and go out and are easily bikeable because it's you know, half a mile away. And yet, you know, when I was there, the Americana just this Saturday, you know, we were fighting our way through traffic. It felt like, you know, there were streets we were on where, you know, if anyone managed to open their door or, you know, moved over, you know, we would be victim to that. And anyways, I just feel like those are the areas that we are going to want to encourage more easy access. You know, those are the trips that I think are really going to be something, again, mentioning the climate action and adaptation plan. Like, those are the areas where I think we would prefer folks to not, you know, jump in their car from North Glendale or South Glendale and bike up to the Americana or bike to the Whole Foods, or drive to the Whole Foods. So I think if we can try to add more around those, you know, those shopping districts, like I said, you know, entertainment areas, you know, we got the Alex Theater, you know, there's all sorts all along Brand there. That I think would be a huge win for this plan. As Alex said, if not Brand, I mean, a north-south corridor along Central, I think would be really, really significant. And looking at the freeway up there, I mean, folks, it looks as though they have to go all the way over to Pacific or to Jackson for any kind of easy access across the freeway coming from the north. So the impression I get is that there's this kind of like protected area in the downtown that is not, it's just sort of impenetrable, if you will, where there's very little protected or dedicated bike lanes for that area. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and would love to see Glendale Avenue. I guess I'll throw out another mention for that if possible, because you can see how that would provide such great access for folks coming through the city. Connecting all the way up to Verdugo and Cañada Boulevard, all the way down to Atwater. So yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Sorry, one more, Jennifer, if you don't mind. Cole reminded me of this. This issue about brand, Sam, you had alluded to a potential bike lane versus a protected bike lane. I think given the project that we're currently about to implement, another project that has now again been delayed on brand between Glen Oaks and Mountain, I do think, as far south as we can take that project without impacts, I think is worth making a note. I know that specific section just south of Glen Oaks, there's a couple of taxi parking spots, and there's a really wide third or fourth lane, if I'm remembering correctly. I know that there's room, and the lanes there are very wide. So I'd like to see two versions. I'd like to see a version that entertains brand going the whole way, but I would also like to see a version where how far can we go by just putting in a bike lane? Because I think both should be entertained, and if we're going to have this Public Works disclaimer, at least we have a second version where we can drop in a bike lane and it's not an issue. And the reason I'm particularly interested in that section is City Council just looked at a project at Brand and Sanchez that is the tallest building, going to be the tallest building in Glendale. It's 900 units. So imagine 2,000 brand new Glendale residents. And do we want to have this self-fulfilling prophecy of getting all of those people in a car to drive 2 blocks away to go to Trader Joe's because they don't feel safe walking or biking? Or do we want to create a city where those people are more encouraged to walk and bike and not create more traffic in our city, as we're always complaining about? So if we want to reduce traffic and reduce congestion and address that issue, we need to build a city as if we actually want to do that. And then the same thing on the southern side of Brand. Cole reminded me, Atwater, we do have that existing bike lane coming into the city of Glendale. I think at the very least, we should be pushing that bike lane from San Fernando up to Los Feliz. That is a very wide segment of the corridor. I think there's a merge lane that disappears just after San Fernando going northbound. So that should be looked at. And then going back to the gap issue, this section on Central between Wilson and Broadway is unacceptable to me. I don't know why the bike lane just drops. I know that there's a turn lane going northbound to Wilson. I don't know what the justification for maintaining that turn lane is, but I would like for that gap to go away and that we have a continuous facility on Central. Great, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay.
I can address the central issue since it's come up a couple of times, if I may.
Of course, thank you.
I believe, Cole, you had mentioned, that it seems like there's this zone in the middle of downtown where everything, it's not as connected. And we're also rethinking that, and we're trying to figure out, again, a strong north-south and then east-west connection through downtown. For the north-south, that is likely going to be central. We're looking at the reason it's not shown on the map is the Metro BRT project. So we're trying to get more information about the Metro BRT project and how this would integrate with that. Because the BRT project comes in at Broadway and goes up to Glen Oaks. So that's the gap on Central. So I think we just want to reflect that more accurately in our recommendations and show how those two or how our recommended projects would connect to the BRT project and understand what the cross section is there on Central for the Metro project. And that would fill in that gap and create a strong north-south connection. And then as far as east-west goes, we have on the south end Chevy Chase, and then on the north end we're looking at Wilson, California, or Lexington, and trying to figure out what makes the most sense as our strong, dedicated east-west corridor that might. That could be a class 4 facility, that could be a two-way protected bike lane on one side of the street, on one of those streets. We're still figuring that out. So we are thinking about these issues, and I'm glad that you're bringing them up, because the more that we hear from our commissioners, from the public, and other officials, the stronger argument we have going forward to address these issues. So thank you.
Sorry, one quick one, and this is it. Since we're talking about downtown Glendale, I did notice my gym is at Milford and Brand, so I'm familiar with this area very well. There are a lot of side streets that do connect to Central and Brand. And in the absence, I'm imagining the worst case where we do not pursue something on Brand. We do owe it to our folks to connect facilities to the proposed bike lane in some cases, the existing bike lane on Central, using some of these side streets. So I had mentioned Duran as an opportunity to pursue for protected bike lanes. Milford and Lexington are also similar streets where they are I think there are 2 lanes in each direction. There's no parking currently on those corridors. Again, this is between generally Maryland and Central. So that would connect a safe path for people to get off of that Central bike lane to the main destinations, which are, primarily as of now on Brand Boulevard. And, those are some examples of where I think this lane reconfiguration guideline can come into real effectiveness is when you look at those streets and you go out there and you just take a look even during rush hour, there are barely any cars on that street. And if technically we are removing one of those lanes, it triggers this public works mandate that we have to do analysis. We have to look at what impacts it has to circulation. It really is going to kneecap our ability to do anything in the city. So there have to be some exceptions for examples like this, like Duran, Milford, Lexington, where we're not tripping over ourselves because we have said that any lane reconfiguration is going to trigger this big hullabaloo. So wanted to mention those two as additional options, some easy wins to put in some bike facilities.
Yes, I like to agree with Alec about the sidewalks being under consideration for bicycles. I clicked on at least 10 of these different streets on the interactive map while you were talking, and I didn't see a single pedestrian, not one. And so they're clearly underutilizing the sidewalks. And I commuted from Adams Hill to the Disney campus there at the Grand Central Business Center for over 20 years, and it was very unusual to see a bicyclist or a pedestrian. But I think, like me, when I first moved to Glendale, I had a bike, and I sold it at a garage sale because I didn't feel safe. So I think we need to address that. I remember the first time I ever spoke to Laura Friedman, it was about bicycles. I said, isn't there something we could do along San Fernando Road there in that easement where the railroad has that? Because it seems like it would be a win-win, like it wouldn't affect the vehicular traffic, and then they'd have the separation and so on. And at the time, there was, easement considerations. So like red tape continues to be a problem. But I think anything that takes a lane away is going to get wrapped up in red tape so long that we won't live to see it happen. So I think we have, I've been to Amsterdam before where they just have, a line down the middle and some bicycle graphics on there, and somehow everybody manages to stay out of the way of the bicyclists. There's more bicycles than people in Amsterdam, and they rely on that as a major source of transportation. But I think we need to think outside the box a little bit. This is a huge challenge. The city was not designed for the number of cars that we have or bicycles of any size or quantity, it seems like. So we just have to get really creative about how we're going to make this multimodal without making things really horrible for any particular mode of transportation. I know in South Glendale, we suffer from very poor air quality. We have a lot of sensitive receivers, so anything that's going to gridlock traffic even more, it's going to be a hard sell down there. And it's already difficult to get around, and so I've seen other cities where they've had to put back lanes that have been taken out at huge cost, and so on. So I hope that we can avoid that sort of situation here in Glendale by trying to underutilize or use things like the underutilized sidewalks or some of the street parking, like on Chevy Chase. There's some street parking over by the junior high school and across from the post office. I don't even know where those people are going who are parked there, but things like that, so that we're not making people's daily commutes a nightmare. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really easy to follow, like how it was laid out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. If there are no more questions and comments, on the reports and information, 6C, climate action and adaptation draft strategies.
Chairperson Pinkerton and members of the Sustainability Commission, we're excited to have Rincon present to you the work that they've done to date in the Climate Action Adaptation Plan. So Rincon are going to provide a brief overview of everything that's led up to this point, but the bulk of this evening's time will be spent looking at the different measures that are being drafted within the Climate Action Adaptation Plan and to receive feedback from the Commission on those draft measures. So we look forward to hearing Rincon's presentation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Hannah Mize and Ryan Gardner, who are the project managers for this project with the City of Glendale. And Hannah, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for having us here, Madam Chair and Commissioners. We appreciate your time. I'll pull up a screen here so we can run through our presentation, and I'll give it just 1 second to come through and make sure it's sharing on your end. All right, how does that look?
We can see that. Thank you, Hannah.
Perfect. All right. So as David mentioned, we're going to do a brief overview of where we're at and kind of a purpose, run through the purpose of the plan, the engagement so far, the work to date, and then really dive deep in the measures. So we're going to breeze through these front slides. However, if there are any questions, absolutely happy to answer them. We really are just looking for some feedback overall on the initiative. So don't want to sidetrack ourselves too much. So that's why we're going to spend most of the time there. The objectives of the meeting today are to, like I said, review the framework. We're going to discuss the systems, the measures, and the actions, and how they all kind of coalesce into the greater plan. We'll also discuss the equity guardrails and effectiveness criteria. That's something that's been really important that we've been navigating through as we develop these measures and actions. I want to touch on climate hazards as well as the inventory, just to kind of set the stage again, make sure we're all on the same page, discuss that implementation phasing, understanding that there are a lot of lofty goals here, and we are really excited about them, and how are we going to implement them over time. So we've started to kind of phase that out and wanted to discuss that. And then finally, dive into the strategy review and really get a key sense of your thoughts on the key measures and actions, and have a real discussion here about what you think. So.
Okay, Hannah, I'm just going to ask you to stop, sorry, for 1 second. I apologize about this. We did actually have a phone call regarding the previous item. Chairperson Pringleton, would you like to hear? Would you like to hear that, or?
Sure.
Okay, I'm sorry, Hannah. Just give us 5 minutes to hear this phone call.
Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
Good evening, Ani. You're on air. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry I had to cut that presentation short, and I appreciate you taking my thoughts.
3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm a pedestrian. I've been car-free for 6 years now, which is a challenge in LA, but it's doable if you plan right. So I just wanted to give you some of my thoughts. I do live within the downtown area and would appreciate bike lanes on Colorado, Glendale, and Brand, as they will also protect pedestrians like me. Some shade trees would be helpful as well. Some few points here. First, on cyclists who are not male. Studies show that most vulnerable people would like a chance to cycle, but are not comfortable to do so without protected bike lanes. Some of the best cycling cities in the world increased the number of users when they introduced protected bike lanes, like in Copenhagen. For instance, currently 55% of the cyclists are women. And in Amsterdam, on a daily basis, you'll see 72,000 cyclists. Creating an infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians also helps build the city's economy. When you walk or bike in the city, you get a chance to look around to see what's around, especially with small shops and boutiques. But whereas with a car, you are focused on where you're going, trying to find parking, etc. So this will help the city economically, specifically the mom and pop shops. Furthermore, women make up 70-80% of consumer purchasing power, and it would make economic sense to help get women to shop at the smaller shops. Good bike infrastructure is also really good for helping the city meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 3, 5, 8, 10, 11, 13, 15, and 17. Finally, the state is now requiring cities to produce an environmental justice element or chapter within an element, and protected bike lanes is a huge part of this, especially because the lanes would also protect pedestrians, reduce GHG emissions, and help with the city meeting its net zero and vision zero goals. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ani.
Bye.
Again, Hannah, I apologize having to interrupt your conversation, but we do have to take those phone calls. So please go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah, no sweat at all. Let me get back to the screen here. Screen 2. All right, there we are. All right, so there we are. It's loaded. This is where we left off, kind of just running through the meeting objectives as far as this part of the process goes. What we're looking for from the commission, really, we want feedback. We want to hear what you have to say on all of the measures and actions, kind of asking questions or if there's concerns. This is a plan for the city. So our goal is to make sure through this iteration, with the different departments and commissions and community members, that we're really reflecting a plan that speaks to the community and to the city in general. So please, if you do have thoughts, let us know. And we're looking for additional feedback over the next week or so. So as you percolate on things, please continue to send them. Happy to incorporate them. The measures that you're looking at today both measures and actions are in this draft form. So we wanted to share where we're at and kind of have this high level conversation to start to fill the gaps and get feedback. But we do want to recognize that there's, some opportunities for additions and improvements here. So this is not finalized. This is really this preliminary stage. As far as the CAP process goes, today we're discussing the preliminary measures. We've already analyzed the baseline, so that's the inventory of GHG emissions as well as the hazards, so we can kind of start to develop those measures and actions in a way that really addresses the concerns or the hurdles that the city will face and kind of help us overcome in the future. We also established an engagement framework that's been integrated throughout, and we've had multiple conversations with folks in person, virtually, at pop-up events, which we can kind of talk about here. And I was just really, honestly, very excited to see the awards go out today to the Girl Scouts as a former Girl Scout. I think that's super cool to kind of see that live on, and then also the Adam Hill neighborhood. So really, a lot of the community is getting involved at these pop-up events. We also have workshops that the city's hosting, both in person and virtual, as well as focus groups. And so here's one picture on the side of the Fall Fest, where folks were able to come out and provide insight in real time and really start to mold the plan for the city. So far, we've really gotten a lot of great feedback. There's been over 500 people engaged in the process. We've gotten a ton of comment cards back. People have provided a lot of really great insight and continuing to do so throughout this process. So one of the things that's very valuable to the city and our team on this plan in particular is making sure this is integrated throughout. So we'll continue to have outreach and engagement, but wanted to highlight where we're at so far, just with some of the top numbers so far that we can share. We've also heard a lot of really interesting things. 96% of respondents to the survey are concerned or very concerned about climate change. So the plan is kind of directly in alignment with what people would like to see. Also, one of the things that I think is really important is getting people who maybe haven't participated in the planning process before and really starting to tap into those resources and understanding that there's so many people in the community that have great ideas, and inviting and including more people at the table. So 32% of the respondents so far have not participated in the planning process before, which is pretty remarkable. We're also looking to support and increase walkable neighborhoods similar to the bike plan. So we've heard that kind of throughout, recognizing that safety is very important, kind of mirroring what was said before. And then supporting and increasing tree canopy to have a safe space. So when people are riding, walking, scootering, skating, whatever folks are interested in doing, it's really safe, it's convenient, and it's shaded as things get warmer. The framework of the measures, so we have systems. On the previous presentation, Sam mentioned that there's this kind of transportation system, that these things are integrated, and that's really how we're starting to see the world. It used to be a lot more sector-based, but we're moving in this space where things are really holistic and trying to develop the measures and actions in alignment with that. So the system is this kind of overarching goal, essentially. The measures provide metrics, so do X by Y year, and have the actions that really tell the story of how we're going to get to those measures. So what are we going to do? A feasibility study, get the funding, kind of answer all those questions that come up and say, how could this not move forward? We want to make sure that those are addressed ahead of time. So including equity and all of those things in the action. So you'll start to see that when you're going through the full plan in a little bit more depth. And then just a couple more slides here. We do have, like I said, the systems based. We have 4 systems. So the mobility, land use, and emergency system. We're going to go in depth a little bit more on what these all look like on the next couple of slides, but wanted to just introduce the concept. We have the urban ecosystems, essentially where we live, work and play, the built systems, the buildings in which we do those things, and then the social and governance system. So how are we really processing these things and moving things through the network and the regulations and whatnot. Just to kind of set the stage, as we move through these measures, we're showing the inventory here. Like I said, this was some of that baseline analysis that we did. So it was a 2021 community inventory. We also did a municipal inventory, which is a subset of the community. So they're not additive and they're very similar in scope. But essentially what we're looking at here, and why we wanted to share this slide, is to really see the areas on the pie where we can make the greatest amount of change. So recognizing that on-road transportation, really, again, reflective of that last kind of conversation we had about the bicycle plan and how that kind of integrates, and then also building energy. So those are the areas where we can make some real change. There's also, of course, water, wastewater, off-road equipment, things like tractors and backhoes and stuff like that, leaf blowers. However, those are going to be a lot smaller. We do want to include those and we want to focus on them for their air quality impacts and others. But the areas where we're trying to reduce the greatest amount of emissions are the areas where we have the most to gain. So on-road transportation and energy. Really quickly, the hazards going forward, there's going to be an increase in quite a different, range of things here between wildfire. We already mentioned some poor air quality parts in the city, drought we've experienced, which has been kind of equally interesting on the extreme weather we had at the beginning of the year. So there's that flooding with the river, atmospheric rivers. So really we're expecting this to increase over time. And the measures and actions that we developed align with ways to start to adapt and be less vulnerable to these impacts. So really recognizing what's there and how do we start to make the improvements going forward. As I mentioned, we also have equity guardrails, and this is something that's really important to us because each of the measures that we develop and actions, we really want them to be equitable. And so we have this kind of a foundation here where we prioritize access, provide economic support, social and cultural support, mitigate displacement potential, and continue investment and engagement in these communities to make sure that the measures and actions that we include in this final plan are equitable, implementable, and realistic. We want something that doesn't sit on a shelf and that really reflects the voices of the community that we've heard, so people can look at it, be excited about it. The city knows how to implement it, and it's a real stepwise process without hurdles. And we recognize that there are hurdles, and we're really working to identify those now to start to mitigate them in the final plan. So that's a big part of that. And again, we also have pillars, which I mentioned kind of loosely at the beginning, where we essentially include in our actions funding opportunities, projects and research, education to really make sure folks know about the programs. That's something that we hear a lot. People are interested and engaged and want to do the quote unquote right thing, but maybe they don't have the information or the access to the information. So that's something that we're also trying to help with. Structural change, things like ordinances, which are already in place, really creating these partnerships. I think that's been something that's been reflected again through the conversations tonight, working with different jurisdictions and departments to really break down those barriers and start to solve these big problems or opportunities together. And then finally, equity, which on the left here, we kind of show is baked in through the whole process. More slides here, and then we're going to dive into the actual strategies, and we want to, again, have really an open discussion and dialogue on those. But before we jump into that, as mentioned, we've developed some phasing. And so essentially this first phase of this climate action and adaptation plan, our goal is to hit a goal in 2030 and then another in 2045, understanding that the plan will be updated in future iterations. So we have phase 1, 2, and 3, and then over this whole time, some of the measures will already be in play or continue to be in play. And we want to really recognize that the work that's already being done or that's being planned is also recognized in this plan. All right, and then the last one, again, like I mentioned, there is a municipal inventory. Although we're not showing that today, really one of the cool things about this plan is the inclusion of a municipal leadership measure in each one. So that recognition that as a city, we can lead by example and really kind of demonstrate that these things are possible and doable, and it's exciting, and there's opportunities to save money and make the world better. So it really kind of shows that perspective. There's similar actions to the community, but they're a little bit of an accelerated schedule, or if not the schedule's accelerated, the actual reductions are. So it's kind of just trying to really provide that opportunity to demonstrate, where we want to go and how we can help the community get there more broadly. So that's it for the background. I know I breezed through that. We are very excited to go through the preliminary strategies and measures. So I'll pass it off to Ryan. However, we can pause just for a second if there are any questions on that preliminary kind of run through beforehand.
Yeah, Hannah, just a quick question. I noticed this in the draft strategies, measures, and actions. I think you have listed as listed in there 4 phases, whereas in the presentation you have 3. I just wondered which is which, if maybe one is a typo or if there was, yeah, if you could explain that. It's on the second page of the draft strategies.
Yeah, that likely. Oh, sorry. I thought I heard Nick. I think that was me. That was likely a carryover. I think that we've been refining the phasing to make it more flexible. So that's not necessarily set in stone, but more options to kind of get the preliminary layout to really recognize that this will be done in a phased approach. So if there was a discrepancy there, I apologize. It was a multiple kind of iterations going back and forth, and it has not totally been finalized, but this is where we're starting to think of it. So things can be done mostly in fiscal years and not necessarily, everything has to be done at once. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is a work in process, the phasing specifically.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you for the clarification. I didn't mean to call out an inconsistency. Since I realize this is
no worries, you're on
working
it. I like it. I like what I hear.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, Ryan, I'm going to pass it off to you and just let me know when you want me to pop ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Hannah. So we send out ahead of time kind of the full list of actions and strategies. There are a lot of them, so we're not going to sit here and read them off to you one by one. It's already getting late, but we do want to go through and kind of hit on some of the bigger, maybe more impactful, maybe more controversial actions that we're going to be talking about. And just again, I want to reiterate that this is our very first draft. So there's still quite a bit of work to refine this with city staff and departments. We have additional sub-consultants who are providing comments and feedback, and of course, feedback from you all as well. So this, feel free to have at it. We're really looking for just first impressions on overall direction and things that you like and don't like. So with that, I think we can get into talking about each of our different systems. So the building system, I think we've kind of gone over what this includes, but we're really talking about our buildings, our heating, cooling, cooking, the things that take energy within those systems. And then also thinking about how those buildings are going to hold up to future climates. So we know it's going to get hotter, we're going to have flooding, we're going to have potentially impacts from fire and air quality impacts associated with that fire and temperatures. So we know things are going to be different, and we want to make sure our buildings are set up to keep us healthy and keep us safe as these changes happen. Slide. So some of the things that we're thinking through here is how we can procure additional carbon-free electricity. So we've got some, percentages in here and things like that based off of some early GWP studies. But generally just thinking about how can we maximize the amount of renewable and carbon-free electricity we're bringing into the city, and then using that electricity to power as much stuff as we can to get those large greenhouse gas reductions. Along with that, continuing to build resilient and carbon-free or all-electric buildings. So building off of what the city's already doing, and then setting some targets for electrifying existing buildings. And then again, as Hannah mentioned, having this more aggressive municipal goal to really lead by example.
Ryan,
so those are kind of our 4.
Oh, my apologies. Can you go back one slide? I just have a quick question. The building 3 measure, retrofit, X number or percentage of existing buildings. I attended a presentation by Glendale Water and Power a couple of weeks ago, talking about, the cap of basically how to get to 100% renewable portfolio. They have a very low goal for energy efficiency. So I'm just wondering, where will this percentage for retrofits come from? We've got, as you know, the housing stock here is primarily, or more than, I'd say the majority is multifamily. The cheapest energy is energy we don't have to generate, right? So I'm just wondering what the goals are with the retrofits. Are we talking insulation, windows, sealants, that type of thing versus rooftop solar? But also how will you come up with the number, the percentage there? Thanks.
Yeah, I think here, I will get into that. Let's go to this next slide. I think we'll answer some of those questions. This first part here is, again, just on the carbon-free electricity. So bringing in that carbon-free electricity, but also you'll see a lot of actions around preparing the grid, making the grid more resilient. Glendale has some capacity transmission hurdles and that we're working through and looking at options for battery storage and solar, but also looking at the grid and wildfire issues and where we can do vegetation thinning and other measures to try to keep things resilient over time. So that's kind of the first part, is bringing in this carbon-free electricity and making sure that it's reliable and we can rely on it being there as we depend more and more on that. Next slide. So this gets to kind of part of that question that you had about what are those percent reductions? And really what we're talking about is decarbonizing buildings through electrification more than we're talking about like energy efficiency. So kind of the old paradigm for climate action was, how do we get like 2, 3, 4, 5% efficiency out of our buildings through windows and insulation and these types of things? And there's still room for that, and I think it's still important, but where we're able to get really large reductions is by taking things off of natural gas and then powering them with carbon-free electricity. So that gives us a really major reduction as opposed to these kind of incremental reductions. So what we're really going to be focusing on is how do we decarbonize our existing buildings? So what do electrification retrofits look like? How do we get folks to switch over to heat pumps and away from natural gas, especially for hot water heating and HVAC, where we're going to see, that's 80% or so of a building's emissions from natural gas. And then along with that, we're also looking at cool roofs, which will help on the efficiency side. And then direct install of weatherization and other kind of energy efficiency projects along with those electrification projects, especially in affordable housing, low-income housing, to help reduce some of those the cost of energy and energy burden of those communities. And then another one I almost missed here is the commercial building performance standard. So on the residential side, having kind of a replace on burnout type program where when our water heaters break, our HVACs break, we're trying to swap those over at that time to a electric version. It's a much more difficult thing to kind of require, have an ordinance around on the commercial building side because of the high rate of variability of different types of equipment they have. Oftentimes they're overbuilt. And you can't just swap out like for like. There's some other types of work that needs to get done, maybe some engineering. So a building performance standard kind of builds up to that process where we start to collect data, we do some retro commissioning, and then eventually we start to set performance standards that get more stringent over time. So we can also hit those large commercial buildings, of which Glendale has a fair number. So I think that's going to be potentially an important strategy. Is that our last slide for buildings, Anna?
This is on this topic. Are there any questions though before we jump into the mobility and land use? And did that answer the first question? I just want to make sure we address that before we move on.
That did answer it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was just hoping you could define cool roofs that's on this slide here. Explain what that is.
Yeah, so the idea of a cool roof is using roofing that has a really high reflective index or albedo. So, a dark colored roof, especially in Glendale's climate zone, is going to absorb a lot of heat, and especially in the hot summers, and going to increase the amount of cooling that building needs to stay comfortable. So a cool roof, whether it's white or with some new technologies for like single family pitched roofs are actually, they're dark colored, but they have physical properties that actually reflect the sun's energy. So that's what we're talking about, is really just making roof material that reflects that energy rather than absorbing it to keep our buildings cooler.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Wonderful. And any other questions, or should we jump to the mobility? And definitely, if there's questions that come up as we're working through the different systems, as I mentioned, they are very integrated. Please, pop those questions in as well. But I'll pause for another second, and then we'll jump to the next slide if not.
Yeah, for this, I guess I looked through the draft document. I know we're not going to get into all the specifics today, and I might, I'll try and put together my feedback and send it to you all. But for this, the building systems, I think it might be worth incorporating or considering the city's goal, the council's goal of achieving 100%. I always want to make sure I say the right words, but it's 100% clean energy by 2035. So they have adopted a resolution, which I think was passed last year, putting that into place, codifying that or whatever it may be. They also have a goal as a part of that to increase rooftop solar. And I believe there's ongoing work right now being done by GWP to up that number to 10% of all residential customers in the city. So I would say if those goals are not being considered at all in this, that might be worth incorporating. So that's all. Thanks.
Awesome. I wrote those down. We'll make sure that that's incorporated. I appreciate that.
Also, I had a comment about, my main concern about electrification is the added cost of electricity versus gas. And just this week, there was a article in the Orange County Register about how the Pacific Gas and Electric and the other Edison and all the other large electric companies are going to start increasing their per account costs, like per, there's the flat fee and then there's the usage fee. And the great thing about usage fees is it incentivizes people to use less electricity so that their bill goes down. But when you impose a flat fee, that it will also be passed on to solar users, it disincentivizes people to go solar because, well, if they're going to have to pay through the nose anyway, why go and cost savings is one of the drivers of people adopting solar. But would this plan have anything in there to build in some measures to keep once the electricity is the only game in town and they can charge whatever they want and all this, like how are we protecting people on fixed incomes, the equity piece of it. I saw you had something for helping low-income people get, weatherization, but then that also includes electrification, which also sets them up for these higher utility costs down the road. So is that something that they're taking a look at now?
Yeah, definitely. It's part of what we're thinking about, and one of the kind of actions in here is to do a deeper dive analysis of what the on-bill and upfront cost impacts of these electrification projects will be. The more this gets studied, it looks like in general, the costs are going to be about the same or a little lower on bill after electrification. And what is promising is that Glendale Water and Power rates for electricity are quite a bit lower than the investor-owned utilities, which is a really big benefit. I'm pretty confident that most people, if not all, will see a cost savings. When we did a really deep dive analysis for City of Sacramento with SMUD rates, every single building in the city saved money after electrification. So it probably will look pretty good. there's a lot going on right now with rates. Part of the reason that they are switching to that larger base rate is allegedly, or I guess the reason that they state doing that is to be able to keep those base rates will scale based on income, with higher income households paying higher base rates. And part of that is so that they can try to keep rates lower for low income. So there's a lot going on to try to balance this out. And part of the sentiment around solar has been that people who own single family homes and can afford solar, we've been incentivizing them. And then people who live in apartments or lower income folks who can't afford solar have been kind of paying to incentivize them. So that's what's caused a lot of, or at least those are the reasons people state for a lot of these rate changes and things like that. But yes, definitely thinking about how this is going to impact homeowners. And I think some of the first actions we have is to do, additional deeper dive analyses into how electrification will impact the community and what that'll look like upfront and on bill.
Thank you.
I think we're good to go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to mobility and land use. This is thinking about kind of every aspect of how we move around the city, and that goes everywhere from the layout and the zoning of the city. And we've been, we talked about this quite a bit, talking through the bike ped plan. But if you don't have to go as far to get to the grocery store, or get to the corner store or to the coffee shop, it's a lot easier to walk or bike there. So that's kind of high level, long term, like how do we lay out our city and how do we plan for the future in that way? And then also the bike ped plan, but also transit, and how we use vehicles and which of these forms we prioritize. Even when we build bike lanes and sidewalks, they're kind of built around the vehicle, and they oftentimes take second chair, or they're less prioritized. So thinking about how can we change that paradigm for the future and really prioritize other forms of mobility rather than just vehicles, which have been prioritized for a long time. And then once we do that and reduce VMT as much as we can, or vehicle miles traveled, then thinking about how we can decarbonize those vehicles that are left. So electric vehicles, other alternative forms, whether it's hydrogen or something else, but thinking about decarbonizing that. And then thinking about all of that in the context of climate change and emergency events, and how the climate is going to be in the future. So like, are roads going to be flooded? Do we have to get people out of the hills if there's a fire or something else? So thinking about that, the mobility in the context of a changing climate and a different future. Next slide, please. So we've got 6 different measures that look at this system. So creating more walkable neighborhoods with a mix of land use types to reduce reliance on cars, reducing VMT through mode share shift away from single occupancy vehicles, having more convenient and accessible transit to increase ridership numbers, having that shift to zero emission vehicles, then also looking at off-road vehicles, decarbonizing those, so your lawnmowers, leaf blowers, construction equipment, things like that. And then again, having the municipal leadership to develop a decarbonized fleet ahead of the rest of the community to demonstrate it's feasible. We move ahead. Walkable neighborhoods, again, looking at how can we change the zoning? Can we allow there to be corner stores and more of these like cool mixed use parts of the city? I think one takeaway we had when we came to do our tour was the places that everyone was describing as like, oh, this is a really cool part of the city where people like to come and visit, was a place that had some different uses. There was some coffee shops, there was some retail, there was a corner store. So how can we do that more, but still keep the character of the city? So I think that's one thing we're going to be looking at. Parking is something that is always controversial, but looking to reduce the amount of parking as kind of one of the sticks to get people out of their cars. The reason people drive single occupancy vehicles all the time is because it's really, really easy and really, really cheap compared to places that have less driving. So starting to think about how can we take that space back from cars, which take up a ton of space, and get that back to people. So can we have small parks or something else in place of tons of parking? And then thinking about, again, as another level, dynamic parking pricing. So can we charge for parking, make it a little less convenient to do that, and then use that money to invest back in the community, invest back in mobility. So there's a lot of other pieces around this, but this is kind of some of the things that people always like to talk about. They tend to be controversial, especially parking. So I want to start daylighting that ahead of time and make sure we can kind of address any comments there and take that into consideration.
Quick question on this, if I could. For parking minimums and maximums, you're talking about number of spaces necessary for, say, a high-rise residential development or a grocery store or shopping mall?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if a lot of zoning has like, you shall have at least, 2 parking spots per
Unit
1,000
or-
square feet or
right,
per resident
right.
or something. So
Something that's,
knocking those down to,
no, go ahead. Thank you.
no, please go ahead.
Something that strikes me, these things and things like, removing number of lanes, letting bikes go on sidewalks, removing parking minimums, electrifying all lawn care equipment. There has to be a lot of political will and leadership there. Locally, Glendale considered electrifying, mandate for electrified lawn equipment, but only leaf blowers made it through the city council. So I'm just curious, have you had success, or are there other cities comparable in size to Glendale that have had success with these parking minimums or the dynamic parking pricing?
Yeah, I think just off the top of my head, Sacramento is going through adopting their climate action plan and general plan update, and they already have a lot of dynamic parking pricing throughout the city, but they're also adopting these parking minimums, removing parking minimums and adding parking maximums in priority transit corridors and within a half mile of those corridors, which ends up being like most of their city. And there are others that are kind of moving in this direction. We've been working with Santa Barbara on some similar ones recently. And I know there's quite a few others. This is a political issue for sure. So we'll have to continue to see how it unfolds and what people's will is around this. I think the important piece is you can't just get rid of parking, right? Or get rid of lanes. So you have to provide other options as well. Along with that. So that piece is just as important or more important than this piece, but I think they work together to actually move the needle on VMT, which California has not been super successful in yet.
No, understood. Thank you for that explanation.
Let's go to the next slide, Anna. So non-vehicle mobility, this is the bike ped infrastructure that we've already spent a lot of time talking about, and I think we definitely want to make sure that those goals and the reduction goals for the cap are aligned and those level of efforts are aligned. So we'll be working to do that, but then also building off of that to look at transit as well, and expanding transit, making transit more accessible, and also making sure that it's comfortable in the face of climate change. So if it's super hot out and we have really hot streets with no shade and no bus stations and things like that, we're going to have a harder time getting people encouraged to go out and do this. So that's something we need to keep in mind. Post-COVID, transit has been a real challenge. So looking at what does transit look like now in the future when people are working from home more, there's a lot of things kind of in flux. So, but this is an important piece to getting to our long-term sustainability goals.
And I just want to jump in really fast, Ryan. I think another plan to the question earlier, I was just doing a quick double check on it, is Burbank. And I'm pretty sure we finished that one up in 2022. And I think they also did a pretty progressive parking measure and also a TDM measure, which was really interesting. So just wanted to add that on to some more local projects, but I'll pop to the next slide here.
Thanks.
So the next piece, EVs. So really looking at it's really hard to increase like the requirement for people to drive EVs. So really the role of government and cities is to make sure that there are enough infrastructure to support these new vehicles. So thinking about how many EV chargers we need installed citywide, both public and private. Thinking about continuing to implement the EV REACH code and making changes to that as necessary to reflect the adoption rates. We're talking about potentially creating like a zero carbon district where only zero carbon vehicles could go during certain times. And then also looking at, like I said, the electrification of EV or off-road equipment, which aligns with some of this, what the state is doing, especially for equipment under 25 horsepower, which is like their small engines. And I think going back to the political side of this, like leaf blowers are a great place to start, but I think people will start to see the cost benefits of other electric equipment. We're starting to see more like lawnmowers and all kinds of other stuff that just the operational costs are so much lower and the upfront costs are almost the same, that I think it's just going to continue to make more sense for folks and become more politically feasible as we, in the short term.
Absolutely. Any other questions on this part before we move to the urban ecosystem?
Yeah, if I can, the transportation planner here. So I really like what's in this section. I think you're hitting a lot of good points. I do want to add or maybe make some suggestions. I know that Cole, for example, brought up in the previous presentation our e-bike rebates that we provide as a city to encourage people to use other modes of transportation. I think that can be enhanced to include scooters, other mobility devices that are not a car that are electrified. I feel like, this is the elephant in the room. We talked about transportation in the previous topic. We see the greenhouse gas impacts of transportation in our city. So I just want to emphasize this section as much as possible. And I really like what's in here. The other thing that I'd like to incorporate somehow is for the city to look into its own transportation demand management ordinance. So for folks that aren't familiar with that, the state does require, for example, large employers, employers that have more than 500 employees, they have to have a program in place that encourages their employees to not drive to their workplace. So think of the Disneys and the DreamWorks of the world, even the city of Glendale has more employees than that they, for example, pay their employees to bike to work instead of driving. And so I know that there's a state ordinance. I know that cities can adopt their own ordinances. I know the city of LA is going through their TDM update. Either it recently was adopted or they're almost ready to adopt an updated version. So I'd like to see an updated or our own version of our TDM that is robust. that encourages people to walk and bike and take transit. I know that the larger apartment buildings, the new developments, some of them do fall into this category where they are a part of an existing TDM here in Glendale. But I'd like to look into that and see how we can expand that to further encourage people to walk, bike, and take transit. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the things we touched on is, based on the physical, how can we physically change the built environment to get people to not necessarily get in a car. I also really like the idea of the neighborhood bodega where there are commercial resources available to somebody within their neighborhood, so they don't have to leave their neighborhood to get a gallon of milk or what have you, oat milk if you're being environmentally conscious. So things like that I'm really happy about, and I see a lot of that is in here. So the things I would encourage is TDM, enhanced TDM here in the city, and enhanced incentives for mobility devices.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, it seems like you are prioritizing walkable neighborhoods and the non-vehicle mobility over EV. Is that your plan at the moment?
I think that is the plan. It's challenging because I think EVs are just going to happen in a lot of ways, and they're a really convenient drop-in solution. They're the same way we do things, just kind of a different platform, and there's a lot of benefits to that. But I think there are a lot of benefits to getting people out of their cars. If you have everyone in EVs, there's still all the emissions associated with building all those cars. There's still traffic. There's still just, time sitting around in your car that can be better spent. So I think that is really the gist, is let's do what we can to make it so cars aren't the only option. They're expensive. There's other downsides. But at the end of the day, I think EVs are likely going to make up the largest chunk of the reduction in the transportation sector, if I had to make a guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to just encourage that what you're doing currently, walkable neighborhoods, non-vehicle mobility over EVs, because I know, like you just said, EVs still have other downsides. But I just wanted to encourage that. But it sounds like you're doing it, which is great. Obviously, it's hard, but yeah.
All right, should we move to the next system, or are there any other questions, comments, ideas that we should incorporate? Really appreciate all the feedback so far.
Yes, as having worked for a company that had a large it was the commuter transportation department of the environmental policy group that incentivized employees to leave their cars at home and so on. If you need any help, feel free to reach out, because that was my first job at my employer back in the day, so it was pretty effective. But they also had van pools and things like that. I remember that one of the studies showed that the city's largest energy impact was on employees just getting to work, and so I just feel like we could really move the needle on all this if we could have these city programs that are really well thought out and really incentivize people with usually it's some kind of gift card, or you earn points and then you can redeem it for gift cards or merchandise or whatever. But also there's some logistics with just having doing some research and figuring out where the employees live, where are the concentrated areas where there's a lot of employees, and they could disaggregate the information to remove people's names or whatever, and just kind of look at zip codes or something like that, and then set up van pools for those particular people, or I know Disney subsidizes the Metrolink passes up to a certain point, and they have this thing called a guaranteed ride home program. So if you carpool to work with somebody and they have to leave for some reason, they get sick or their kid got sick or whatever, they would send you home. Back then it was a rental car, now I guess it would be an Uber or something like that, but just so they could eliminate that fear of being stuck, without a ride home. So things like that. So I'd be happy to, brainstorm things like that could work if that's something that you guys don't have a lot of background in. So feel free to consider me a resource. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. All right. So moving into our next system, thinking about the urban ecosystem, and this is where we're looking at parks and green space, our water consumption and conservation, but also flooding and stormwater, organic waste and composting. So starting to think about carbon sequestration, organics diversion, and then mitigating wildfire and flooding. So kind of thinking about the tensions between these different aspects. So wanting more green space, wanting more open space, also preparing for a future climate where, wildfire, flooding, and other issues could become a bigger problem. And then also thinking about local foods.
Just one quick comment. I'm sorry, on the green space element, we have a median with natural grass turf along Glen Oaks Boulevard that goes for several miles. Apparently, it's watered with reclaimed water, but there's no signage there. I remember talking to the city council once saying, well, why do we have grass there? Why isn't that a landscape with, xeriscape natural plants or something? I think things like that, little measures like that, signage would provide education if people are driving around, because there is a big push to take out your natural grass now, but having some signs indicating that uses recycled water, I think, would be a good, just a quick example of an easy educational thing to do. Thanks.
So yeah, we've got 6 different measures here covering kind of those topics. SB 1383 is a major driver for organic diversion. That's really the majority of emissions from waste come from organic material, almost 100%. So that's really the focus and waste on the short term. Looking at increasing tree canopy over time for the carbon sequestration benefits, but also for like all the other benefits of trees and reducing heat island, providing shade, better air quality. So there's a lot of great co-benefits there. But then on the flip side, managing wildfire as open space gets more dry in general, and we're expecting to see greater fires. So making sure we're preparing for that and managing those lands to be safe. Looking at reducing food insecurity, which is a part of SB 1383, but kind of connecting that to other programs already happening and expanding on those. Then looking at water conservation and stormwater management opportunity. Again, looking at where the city can really be a leader in these spaces and then use that as a demonstration for the rest of the community.
One quick comment, if I may. This is something my day job's with the City of LA. Something I proposed is mandatory education in grocery stores, meaning little shelf tags as far as whether given packaging is recyclable, but also, since we know there's a tremendous amount of food waste, the entire food system in the United States, there are zero waste cookbooks out there, how to generate virtually no waste when you're cooking, recipes for cooking with leaves and stems and peels and things that people typically don't. It might be helpful to require grocery stores to have that literature available, even if it's not on shelf tags. Also information about freezing foods, because a lot more foods and pasta, for example, can be frozen, but people don't think foods like that. But I'm thinking of, mandating some educational flyers be displayed in grocery stores might go a long ways to helping reduce food waste. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you.
Also,
And yeah, kind of
on-
along some of those lines. Oh,
I had
go
a
ahead.
question on the, you mentioned the bullet point 2 is update waste hauler contracts to include expanded organic waste collection. No, the slide that you just left, I had it on there. Yeah, bullet point 2 about the waste hauler. And the current practice is to require residents to put their food scraps in a plastic bag and to put the plastic bag in their green waste, which means someone on the other end of that supposedly opens all those, makes sure that it's really organics, and then does I don't know what with the plastic bag. So I understand other cities like Los Angeles don't have to do that, but is that something that we could look at, maybe eliminating the whole plastic bag requirement out of that thing? Because that's not part of the SB 1383. That's just how these bidders propose to deal with the organics. So is that something that you're looking at?
That's a great flag. I think looking at compost quality is definitely a part of what we wanted to do. Part of SB 1383 is meeting the procurement goals, and that is really challenging for cities. And in a lot of cases, they need to find somewhere else to put that compost. And part of that ideas are like, can we put it on farmland? Can we put it on pasture land? And the hesitation there is having that, those impurities, I guess, or like contamination in the compost. So if you have pieces of plastic bag or you have other garbage that's making it into the compost, it does make it really challenging to use that compost places. So that's a great flag and something that we can look at. And I think we do have some actions in there around like looking at compost quality and making sure that it's useful for other purposes.
Or maybe incentivizing people to do their own composting, because 1383 doesn't require anything like that. And the city could even incentivize, homeowners and businesses to compost, and there's nothing doing that right now. Instead, they're just raising the rates for quite a bit for everybody. And, because of all this extra work that's involved with picking up the organics, it triggered all this rate restructuring and so on that people were really upset about here in the city. So it seemed like it would make more sense to incentivize people to compost rather than punish everybody for this Senate bill that's difficult to comply with. Thank you.
Just one quick comment for people that are resistant to taking out their lawns, their grass, maybe promoting grass cycling. Just leaving the grass clippings on the lawn. That LA used to promote that, but it's been decades since I've seen any outreach about that. Thanks.
I think we can go on to the next slide. So looking at managing vegetation and the tree canopy, so prioritizing trees, especially in social sensitivity census tracts. So it just turns out that low income areas tend to have less trees than high income areas, and that exacerbates impacts in those areas, especially with climate change. So looking at where we can add trees to parts of the city that don't have trees currently is definitely a big goal here. Making sure that that's getting embedded in urban forestry management plans. But then on the other side, starting to prepare for these high risk, high fuel load areas within the WUI or the wildland urban interface. So reducing fuel loads, so standing dead trees, things like that, that can cause risk for wildfire. So managing those two pieces. And then looking at vegetation management, and this kind of links back to some of the like resilient power grid things as well. So just looking at like where are critical facilities, where are high danger wilderness urban interface zones, and then doing vegetation management in those areas to help protect them from future wildfire. And then food insecurity and water use kind of lumped together here, looking at banning the use of non-functional turf is a big push right now in California, especially in Southern California. Create small community gardens, looking at places to expand community garden programs, and then doing some partnerships and education around these types of programs. So taking the kind of edible food recovery stuff from the other section, and then also adding like local food growing, which was something that the community was definitely interested in, and we wanted to make sure we were getting those in here as well.
Any other questions? I know there's a couple more on turf. We've talked a little bit about that non-functional turf. Any questions though before we jump to the social governance system?
I just had one suggestion is that in terms of water, I know that the city of LA and other cities have developed their own version of a low impact ordinance, low impact development. Yeah, the LID ordinance that the city of LA did that requires new developments or major remodels to include stormwater capture. So I'd like for the city to consider a version of that where we are mandating that new developments capture some water from their property instead of it running off into the drains.
I think as a part of that too, I don't know if this was included in the specific measures or actions, but I'm thinking about having like dual plumbed homes, having an ordinance that would require that for new construction. I imagine for retrofits that's near to impossible, but certainly for new homes, I think that would be worth considering. Thank you. For capturing gray water.
I have a question when they say non-functional turf, about how they define that. So a lot of Glendale is on hillsides. I myself live on a 50% slope, so it's the turf that's actually keeping my yard from ending up in the street. So could the definition of non-functional also include erosion control? Because that's also a stormwater issue too.
Yeah, I think where they're going out with non-functional turf is more, I don't think it applies to like single family lawns, but it applies to like the median that we were just talking about, where like people aren't recreating on it, people aren't hanging out there. It's just like landscaping. That's what they're looking to get rid of.
So that would be for public spaces then. I guess they should clarify that then, so people don't think their yards have to go.
Yeah, I think really where we're looking at is for more like private property would be more the turf replacement programs where we're providing incentives to switch that turf grass to maybe like native grasses that don't require irrigation or like other types of alternatives. So you can still have your erosion control benefits or something like that without having to irrigate as often.
That's great. I think that there's a big education gap in the turf replacement programs, though. I mean, I have friends that have signed up for it, but they don't have the slightest idea what to plant and, you know, what's going to require a lot of maintenance or just as much water as turf or something. So she's struggling. She had like her deadline was extended like 3 times. She's been trying to, so I just don't think that it's as achievable as it could be. Like maybe the replacement program could provide more information to help people comply. Maybe even some sample landscape designs that could be easily done. So, you know, most people couldn't do a planting plan if their life depended on it. So just little tools that would make it super simple for somebody to be able to comply with it and actually follow through all the way.
Just one other question. This is probably large scale, but like we mentioned, recycled water's watering the median along Glen Oaks. Does Glendale use all the recycled water that it gets from the LA Glendale plant? And if not, is any of it being dumped? But I'm also just thinking, if are we watering because we have no other uses or application? You know, are we watering that median for that reason? But maybe it's time to really think outside the box. Can we make the recycled water accessible to, I believe Disney gets some, but can it be made accessible to residents just based on proximity to the source of it? I'm just hoping that there's no water that's being dumped because it's not all being used. Thanks.
Yeah, that I do not know. We'll have to get with GWP and learn some more about that, or what the current status is. All right, so cruising into our last system is our social and governance system. And this one's a little different than the others. It's less about like physical infrastructure and more about like the behaviors, the government systems, the communications, social cohesion, like how as a community are we gonna do this stuff? So that's kind of what we cover here. And I think this is a pretty new thing, and generally I doesn't end up in climate action adaptation plans. So we're excited to like really call these things out, and hopefully this is kind of the glue that makes all these other systems function. So maybe arguably the most important system, because it's what's going to allow us to actually achieve these goals. So providing education in different languages, so Spanish, Armenian, online, in person, making sure that people are aware of different extreme weather hazards, keeping people safe in those events, increasing the amount of resilience centers. So we have, creating 3 new resilience centers is kind of the number we're at right now, but again, this kind of can be refined over time. Looking at internal protocols and procedures at the city that would include climate and equity lenses to different government decision-making processes, so that we can start implementing these actions whenever there's opportunities to. And then formalizing more city community-based relationships to get long-lasting feedback and build relationships with different folks within the community, and then trying to build community capacity. And that's kind of this idea that if your neighbor relies on electric power being on for their like medical device to run, to check in on them if it's out. And that type of resiliency is it's hard for the government to do that, right? Like that's something we can do in our communities. But the government can help facilitate that and help us make those connections potentially.
Just one real quick question when you're talking about the cooling centers. Do we know, or does GWP know, how many housing units in Glendale do not have some type of air conditioning?
We probably have a pretty good guess. It would be difficult to know like which housing units specifically. There may be some ways for GWP to look at like electricity demand on a cold day versus a really hot day by customer and determine if they have cooling or not. And then there's also some like community surveys that get done that give us like a general sense.
Great, thank you.
And one more piece just on that resilience center, we recognize that there's a lot of kind of opportunities for that, and that could be an existing, and most likely is an existing facility that could be used as this resilience center. So it's not necessarily building something, ground up, but using resources that are already in the community to kind of libraries. I know that's one that's in play already, but things where the hours are more available and stuff. So just to make sure that part's clear, it's not necessarily, full construction of those units. So Ryan, I'll pass it.
Yeah, so we kind of listed up here, looking at the Resilience Center, the emergency notifications, coordinated notification and response services. So just getting in line what we're going to do when we do have a natural disaster or one of these climate impacts happening. And then looking at resiliency for backup power, battery storage, helping to reduce the impact to folks, especially like folks who do need that power, like for a medical reason or something like that. Next slide. And then the internal protocols. So this is really looking at like, how is the city going to implement these things? I think we talked a little bit about, progress on the past bike ped plan and starting to think about what do we need to do to increase the amount of implementation that we're seeing. A lot of that is just funding, but part of it is also staffing and internal policies and internal protocols to help go out and get that funding, help move these projects forward at a better rate. So this is really what these actions are trying to get at. Establishing a climate and equity core team. The city with David, Elizabeth, and others are kind of there, but like formalizing some of those teams around implementation is also going to be like an important step to once we get done with the planning process and move into the implementation process. And then finally, again, a lot of this stuff that we're working on, a lot of the things we're talking about, whether it's bike lanes or car chargers or compost programs, they only really happen if the community is involved, right? So continuing to develop these partnerships with the community, understanding how policies are going, whether it's working or not with the community. And then on the adaptation side, making sure that we've got these connections in the neighborhoods to understand, to help manage situations. So having a block captain program in high fire risk areas to kind of disseminate information or hold events where we can talk about defensible space or vegetation management, but just improving the connections overall between the city and the community around the implementation of this plan moving forward.
Awesome. So from here, we're going to jump into next steps, but I can pause just for a second if there's any questions and then run through next steps and go from there. All right. If questions do come up, of course, please, as mentioned, let us know. This is a very iterative process, and we, again, appreciate your time and input so far. So next steps. As I mentioned, kind of throughout, this is a process where we're getting that feedback, so we'll incorporate that into the measures and actions. We've gotten some feedback already, so kind of just compiling all that, collating it, and starting to integrate it into the broader plan. Then we'll share that back out with the team, update any of the missing percentages. Right now, we have those kind of tentatively in there, and we're just trying to refine it based on the actual emissions inventory and the alignment with the goals going forward. So we'll start to button those up, make sure that that's all in alignment, really recognizing that there's opportunities to kind of change those in some instances. However, where we start to, update numbers and change things around in one area, we'll have to then make those changes equally on the other side of things. So for example, if the energy, we decide to go a little bit lower on those reductions, transportation would need to be a little bit higher. So just really balancing that out and making the most implementable plan for the city. We'll do some outreach on the draft climate action plan. Again, that's going to be throughout this process, but really so the whole community can see the plan itself, see it in its entirety with the inventory, the vulnerability assessment, the measures, and then an implementation section at the end, which really clearly outlines the finalized phasing that we have and who's going to implement it. That's something that we really think is important in the plan, to have, the team from the city side of things, if there's partners, information like that. We also have a funding analysis for some of these measures, which will integrate into the final cap, and then make any updates based on the outreach that we get, do the CEQA analysis once the document is done and the measures are finalized, and then take that to City Council for adoption and really start to implement that in tandem. I just want to recognize that things at the city are already being done. Ordinances, things have already kind of come into play at the same time. So long-term, really kind of moving forward towards that CEQA adoption and recognizing that we're still working on what we can in the meantime. So really exciting stuff. I think this is the most fun part. I know there's a lot of kind of cool conversations and ideas and solutions we can start to identify here. So we're really trying to just get the most feedback from the room. We know that there's a lot of experts and a lot of people who have different lived experiences, and we want to reflect that in this plan. So any feedback, all feedback is welcome. No bad ideas, no silly questions. We're really just excited to make this plan the best document we can for you. So that's where we're at today. I can, again, open it up for questions, but I wanted to, before we jump there, just thank everybody for their time again. Really appreciate it. I know we're close to 9 on I don't even know, Wednesday, but really do appreciate it and excited, like I said, about that next step. All this, the work that the city has done thus far on previous iterations, the Greener Glendale plan, all of the data collection up until this point to get to where we are, just a ton of work, and it's really coming to a cool place. So I will pause there and I can stop sharing my screen, open it up for questions, and then go from there.
Just one quick question. After the plan is completed, how long do you think the CEQA analysis will take?
Yeah, great question. So as soon as the measures and actions are pretty much buttoned up, if as we start to finalize the actual climate action plan, we can start on the CEQA analysis at that time, just to keep the process moving and make sure all of that's going. In general, maybe 2 months, but it could be done in tandem with the finalization of the cap, as long as the measures and actions are buttoned up. So
It's much shorter than I thought. Thank you. Great presentation. Thanks.
I'll just say quickly, thank you for the presentation. Just like with the bike plan, I was also around when the 2010 Greener Glendale plan was adopted. And I'm just very impressed with where we're at right now, given our history. So thank you very much for being part of this effort. I know we still have a long ways to go, but this gives me hope that we're headed in the right direction. I'm also very excited to see the more shorter term improvements and goals. I know that we had talked about 2030 is too far out to be thinking. We need to be looking at strategies that are effective and implemented sooner. And I see that as part of this draft, which was very important for me. So thank you very much, and looking forward to working with you all on this.
Yeah, I have a few questions. I've written down a few comments as well. So I'll maybe go through the questions first. So Jennifer mentioned already a question about the timeline. I was curious, so when about do you anticipate this being open to the public for their feedback?
Yeah, so that we're going to have a couple of different phases. The measures and actions will be released once we start to finalize the feedback and get the information integrated. We also have been collecting feedback on these surveys that we've sent out based on what people's interests are, and starting to integrate that in. Of course, that's not sharing with the public at the final version, but trying to integrate it from the foreground. So we'll release that kind of early spring of next year, and then get some more feedback, have another couple of outreach events, open house, all of these kind of things that we've been doing throughout. And then from there, make any revisions, have a finalized version in fall is the goal.
Okay, thank you. So aiming for the fall then for final adoption. Okay, so are you in this? I've noticed there are some things while we've gone through this presentation and also reading through on my own, there are a few things that are kind of already existing activities or existing actions. Is that something that you are working through this process to kind of gather and include in here? I'm speaking specifically maybe to the wildfire mitigation plan. I mean, I know there's an annual update that the fire department gives, and it's presented. There was the note about the organics collection by the franchise haulers. So I'm just wondering if the feedback that you want from us, or that you're going to be gathering from maybe the city, is some of these existing programs and initiatives, or if this is all like purely sort of new things to be developed and new things to work on.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we really want to make sure we're accounting for the work that's kind of already in play and that's being done right now. So that's something, if you identify maybe something that we missed, please let us know. At the beginning of this process, what we did was what we call a MASS tool, measure, analysis, and strategy tracking tool, and essentially went through all of the existing plans and policies, programs, and ordinances and stuff like that, and kind of mapped out the things that have been most in alignment so far, using, of course, that Greener Glendale plan, and seeing kind of what the status of some of those things were. Because, of course, some things were implemented that right away, and some things were a little bit trickier. And so during the kind of initial development phase, we asked questions about those hurdles that were faced and how those were overcome, so we could start to develop in this iteration initiatives that maybe bypass those hurdles at the forefront. So I definitely want to build on all of the work that the city's done. I think that's really essential, and it's a super important story to tell, but there's also more or less opportunities to reflect that in the inventory updates and whatnot as those changes get made in future years. So definitely want to incorporate ongoing or current initiatives. So if you do see something, please let us know.
Great. Okay, that answers that question. Thank you. And then regarding the numbers in the in this presentation and also in the draft measures. So for instance, there's target percentages, target units. Is that something that we will be working with you all to help generate those numbers, or is this going to be coming out of potentially like the Spark tool that you've mentioned? So emissions or. Yeah, so is it the Spark tool or is it us, to put it simply?
You want to jump in on that one, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a back and forth. So this first phase, we really want to just get a sense of how, like the level of, aggressiveness, or how aggressive we want to be with our actions. And from that, with the action language we have, we're going to quantify what we think is a reasonable reduction from those actions. So we'll use the Spark tool to do that. And we'll show you kind of in this, probably the next time we talk to you, we'll have those numbers filled in based on the actions. And you'll have an associated reduction, and we'll kind of see how we're doing compared to the target. And it could be that, hey, we're kind of short, we didn't quite get to our target, we need more aggressive actions, which based on what we have now, I don't think will be the case. Or it might be like, we're way over, there's some things that we could move around or prioritize or shift. So that's kind of how this will play out. And then as we go out to the community and there's pushback on certain things, when we take actions away or make them less aggressive, that'll have an impact on the reductions potentially. So we'll continue to use that Spark tool as we refine language, right? Like we could talk about electrifying buildings, but there's a big difference between having an ordinance that requires something to happen and like having a voluntary outreach program. So generally, as we go through this process, that language shifts and then the numbers will shift with it, and we'll just try to stay in that sweet spot of hitting our targets and having actions that support that percent reduction, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, I'll be very interested to hear what the feedback is like from the city with this. I think the department heads piece, I think, is going to be really interesting to know kind of what they think, but also what the lead department column on this report, will look like once you've assigned those. Just thinking about like where most of this effort is going to lie within the city, and if there's some gaps where maybe the city might need to think about expanding their capacity potentially, because like there's just so much built into this. What else do I have here? Yeah, the social and governance systems I think is fantastic. I work for FEMA currently, and for me, this really speaks to my industry and emergency management. I think that what this systems section is really saying is, emphasizing is that this is an emergency. You know, we need to realize that there are going to be some significant impacts that come from heat, from wildfire, even flooding from increased rainfall. So I really like the idea of the resiliency centers, you know, cooling centers. I think the city might already have some of those that they do. So kind of establishing those more permanently, I think would be a great idea. You mentioned in the report about the whole community approach to emergency management from FEMA, and I think that's fantastic. What else here? Yeah, and I guess my last maybe question or thought is you've brought this up before about the tracking tool. I think you've called it the Cap Dash. I know we're pretty early in the process still, but I'm wondering, like, are you seeing with some of the other cities you've worked with, like, are they having success with that? And really, how do I frame my question? Is there good transparency to the public, and is the city kind of like sticking to it with the plan and putting that out? Because I've looked around a little bit to try and find some of these. I think I looked for the one for South Pasadena, and I really wanted to see what their progress was, and I wasn't really seeing much, and maybe I didn't land on the right page, but would love to know what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is always a bit of a mixed bag. Some cities are being pretty successful getting ordinances in place, starting to try to bring funding in, like all this Inflation Reduction Act money is a really big deal. I think the hurdles still tend to come down to just resources, both staff time and dollars to do these projects, especially like larger infrastructure projects like bike lanes and buying buses. Like it costs a lot more than I guess I would expect. So that's always a bit of a hurdle, but when we go back and look at, you know, we do probably dozens of greenhouse gas inventories every year. Almost all of them are going in the right direction. So I think there is a lot of success out there, and we're kind of right now, maybe the last like 2-3 years have been going through this like CAP 2.0, 3.0, I guess, version where we're starting to look at these 2030 targets. So I wouldn't be too dismayed if you don't see a lot of progress so far towards 2030, because these planning timelines are pretty long, and a lot of cities, like South Pasadena included, have only been sitting on their cap finished for like a year or so. So they're kind of in that process of gearing up to do more implementation.
Okay, great, thank you. And then one other thing I thought wanted to ask, so within the CAP, within the report or the plan, is there any kind of vision, even just like a vision statement or like a kind of illustration, if you will, of like what a fully realized plan would look like? I'm just thinking that would be really beneficial. And if it's not something you do, that's fine. But I'm, you know, we walked through this whole presentation, and I was just sitting here trying to imagine like what Glendale would look like if all of this came to be, and if that could be articulated to folks somehow, you know, that this is what we're aiming for, and if it's in the plan or if it's maybe something the city has to do separately, I think that would be fantastic, because it needs to be conveyed to people what we're doing here, and going through and looking at each of these specific actions on their own isn't gonna do it for them. They're not gonna be able to sort of see the big picture, if you will. So. Yeah, that's one thing I think would be great to have. Almost like the visioning plan that we just did for this is totally different, but the visioning for the Verdugo Wash project that we were considering here in Glendale, like just sort of seeing, like, what is this Glendale going to be that we're trying to aim for? So anyways, not so much a question, more so a comment. And anyways, that's all. Thank you.
Sorry, 2 quick
Absolutely,
comments.
and I can just plug in really fast that we do absolutely do a vision statement, and we're kind of incorporating the community feedback right now. It's been very fun pulling this together to get there, you know, the full cohesion there.
Jeremy, did you want to?
Yeah, back on the building measures and things, something I was thinking about is as I quickly looked through the actual action statements, action numbers that we were sent, I didn't see anything about decarbonization on actual building materials and that full from like life to death process. I'd love to see something like that in the in action on it, at the very least looking at sourcing, if not requiring a certain percentage of recycled materials or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And in our original analysis, we did a kind of a consumptive based inventory, very, very high level. To do one and then in depth would take, a lot of detail and data, but we did a high level kind of analysis. And I definitely want to include that in the, the document. So I think including it in a write-up would make, or in an action measure would make sense to have it in there.
Yeah, no, great idea. Just two quick comments. As far as I know, the organics collection is rolled out fully across Glendale from single-family homes that are serviced by the city, but also the multifamily and others that are serviced by the franchise haulers. But there have been complaints. I haven't experienced it firsthand about how the food waste pails are getting distributed to multifamily homes. I've been told they've been given out without any how-to literature. Again, I don't know. When I got my pail just this week, I think it had a card listing all the acceptable materials. One thing though that bothers me with pails, and again, I work in LA, and LA did exactly the same thing. The size of the pails does not convey that food soil paper. That's to me as big of a problem as food waste. But so you see on the labels little pictures of napkins, but there's a lot more stuff beyond that: to-go containers, paper plates without lining. I think that's just a big drawback. When you give out a small pail, you convey only that small items can be accepted. So I think there's got to be some kind of educational outreach about that, about capturing all the food soil paperware that's out there. And then Glendale, as far as I know, does have executed a contract for a food rescue company, Carrot, Careit, and I don't know if that's structured with a direct contract with the city or with each hauler, but David can elaborate. Thank you.
Yeah, that's with Integrated Waste Management. We have that contract with them. And regarding a couple of things that the Commission has brought up. So in terms of the next steps for us internally is to have very in-depth conversations with Glendale Public, GWP, Public Works, and then we're going to formulate teams around the different systems. So to get that feedback as, we know we're doing this activity, but to make sure that's incorporated to understand the carbon savings that have already been achieved through the city implementing those activities. So that conversation is going to happen. And then to Commissioner Bazemore's, Commissioner Bartras's, direction. So we're internally developing the project management infrastructure. So to make sure that all the different departments, through their processes, that they can incorporate the actions and measures of the CAP and that they can become accountable through that. So we are beginning to have that internal conversation, how to most effectively do that. So once Rincon does leave us and we're holding the CAP in our hands, that we know that we've put in place this project infrastructure that will make sure that the CAP is delivered upon. And we know that that is critical. So I think you're alluding to that. So I just want to say that is a conversation that we are having. And we'd very much like the Commission's input into that conversation too.
I had a question. I think this is probably a question for David, but in the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, the one that has the city seal on it, so I don't think it was from our consultants, but there was a slide that really is very important. It kind of says why we're doing this, right? And so it mentions that there's been an increase from 3 to 35 days of extreme heat days per year. So this was an increase from what, since 2000 or in the past 100 years? Or I think we need to quantify that so people totally understand, like from last year to this year or something. So we just need to add a little bit more information. And same thing with like the 10% or whatever, it's hard to see. 10% increase of wildfire risk and also for rainfall, 15% more severe rainfall. So just say compared to what? So people, there's enough climate deniers out there. We need to give them all the information we can so we can, quantify this in a measurable, verifiable way for them. But okay, thanks.
So that data came out of the vulnerability assessment. So, and I think we can ask Rincon Ser, because I think it's over the next X amount of years will increase to that 35 days. So we can ask them to clarify this time.
Yeah, to make it clear. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I just thought of was when this does come back, I would like to know, what some of the specific things are that the departments gave feedback on. I don't want this to kind of be like a fully new polished thing that we've kind of lost track of, like what those edits were, or what was added, what was dropped. Like, it would be nice to have somewhat of a summary of like where the critiques were, where the gaps were that the city said, hey, we need to fill this in here. So that would be my ask for that. Thanks.
Yes, we can do that.
That appears to be it. Thank you very much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Item number 7, Sustainability Office updates. Mr. Jones mentioned the updates during the staff comment section. Item number 8, adjournment. May I please have a motion and second to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.
And we're adjourned at 9:05 p.m. Thank you and have a great night.